They told her the dress was a gift, silk white, hand-stitched, worth more than her life. And that was exactly the point. Serafina Vale walked down the aisle toward a man who buried people alive, but the real monster? He was already in the room. He'd been hurting her for years, and tonight he just sold her like property. This is the story of a woman who was traded to a mafia king, and what happened when he saw what they did to her. Stay until the end. Hit like. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning. The rain didn't fall that night. It attacked. Sheets of water slammed against the tall arched windows of the Moretti estate hard enough to rattle the iron frames in their stone casings. The sound was relentless, a low, constant roar that swallowed the organ music and turned the ceremony into something that felt less like a wedding and more like a sentencing. Serafina Vale stood at the far end of the aisle in a gown that cost $60,000 and weighed more than her ability to breathe. The corset had been laced too tight on purpose. She knew because her stepfather had watched the seamstress do it that morning, standing behind the woman with his arms crossed, saying, "Tighter. She fidgets when she's nervous. Keep it tight, and she won't move." She hadn't moved since. 214 guests filled the converted cathedral hall of the Moretti compound. She'd counted the chairs from the bridal suite window an hour ago, her fingers pressing white against the glass, while her maid of honor, a woman she'd never met before today, zipped her into the dress and told her to stop crying because it would ruin the makeup. She wasn't crying because of the makeup. She was crying because her left rib was cracked, and every inhale under the corset sent a hot wire of pain through her side that made her vision pulse gray at the edges. The fracture was 3 days old, a parting gift from Conrad Vale, United States Senator, philanthropist, and the man currently sitting in the front row with a champagne flute and a smile wide enough to make the cameras love him. Her stepfather. The organ swelled. Someone nudged her from behind. One of Conrad's aides, a thick-necked man in a charcoal suit who smelled like aftershave and gunmetal. "Walk," he said. Not a suggestion, so she walked. Every step was a negotiation between her body and the dress. The silk train dragged behind her like a white tongue licking the stone floor. The aisle stretched impossibly long, flanked by faces she mostly didn't recognize. Hard men in expensive suits, women dripping in jewelry that probably doubled as insurance policies, politicians whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. She caught fragments of whispered conversation as she passed. The senator's stepdaughter. "Didn't think Moretti would actually go through with it. Looks half dead already." She kept her chin up, not out of pride, out of practice. Conrad had trained that into her years ago. Chin up, smile. Don't let them see you limping. Don't let them see anything. You are a reflection of this family, and if you embarrass me, I will make sure you can't sit down for a week. She was 23 years old, and she couldn't remember a time when her body didn't hurt. At the altar, Rome Moretti waited. He was bigger than the photograph suggested, taller, broader in the shoulders, with hands that looked like they'd been designed for damage and then stuffed into a tailored black suit as an afterthought. His jaw was cut sharp enough to look hostile even at rest. Dark hair pushed back from a face that carried no expression whatsoever. Not cruelty, not anticipation, not even boredom. Just a flat, unreadable calm that somehow felt more dangerous than anger. He didn't look at her when she reached him. He was watching Conrad. The officiant spoke. Words about partnership and futures and the joining of great families. Serafina heard none of it. The pain in her side had become a living thing, and she focused on breathing in shallow sips through her nose, her fingers trembling around the bouquet of white roses that were already wilting in the heat of the overhead lights. "Do you, Serafina Noel Vale, take Rome Alessandro Moretti?" "I do," she said too quickly, because Conrad had told her to say it fast. No hesitation, no pausing. Say it like you mean it, or I'll give you something to cry about when we get home. Except she wouldn't be going home. That was the deal. Rome said his part without inflection. 2 words, flat as concrete. Then someone handed them rings, and the officiant pronounced them. Married, and the room erupted into applause that sounded like the rain beating against the windows, hollow and mechanical, and completely detached from anything resembling joy. Rome didn't kiss her. He turned away from the altar, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward a side corridor without a word. His men, 4 of them, all armed beneath their suit coats, fell into step behind him, like wolves following a lead. Nobody told Serafina what to do next. She stood there for 11 seconds. She counted them in her head because counting was something she did when panic started climbing the walls of her chest. 11 seconds of standing alone at an altar in a cathedral full of criminals, while the applause faded and the conversations resumed and the champagne began flowing, and nobody, not a single person in that room, looked at her like she was anything other than furniture. Then an older woman in a navy dress appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Moretti," the woman said, and the name landed like a slap. "I'll show you to your suite." The suite was on the third floor of the east wing, grand in a way that felt aggressive. Vaulted ceilings, dark wood paneling, a four-poster bed the size of a small country. Heavy curtains blocked the windows. The carpet was so thick her heels sank into it, and she had the irrational thought that the floor was trying to swallow her. The woman left without another word. The door clicked shut. Serafina heard the lock engage from the outside. Locked in. The panic didn't climb this time. It detonated. She pressed her back against the nearest wall and slid down it, the silk gown pooling around her like melted wax. Her breathing went ragged, sharp little gasps that made her cracked ribs scream. She pressed both hands against her mouth to muffle the sound, because she'd learned years ago that crying too loud brought consequences. 12 minutes. She gave herself 12 minutes to fall apart. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheekbone, and stood up. She changed out of the gown. There was a silk robe hanging in the bathroom, cream-colored, monogrammed with an M on the breast pocket. She put it on because her own clothes were in a suitcase that nobody had brought up, and she didn't know who to ask, and she sure as hell wasn't going to wander the hallways of a mafia compound in a wedding dress looking for luggage. The mirror above the bathroom sink showed her a face she barely recognized, pale, hollowed out under the eyes. The makeup artist had done an impressive job hiding the yellowing bruise along her jawline, but sweat and tears had eroded the foundation, and now the discoloration showed through like watercolor bleeding through paper. She touched it gently with 2 fingers, pressed, winced, pulled her hand away. Then the bedroom door opened. Not knocked. Opened. The lock disengaged with a heavy metallic chunk, and the door swung inward, and Rome Moretti stepped through it like he owned the space, which, technically, he did. He'd removed his suit jacket. The sleeves of his white dress shirt were rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms roped with muscle and marked with scars that told stories she didn't want to hear. A shoulder holster sat against his left side, the grip of a matte black pistol visible beneath his arm. He closed the door behind him. The sound of it shutting sent Serafina's heart into her throat. He didn't speak immediately. He stood by the door and looked at the room. The untouched bed, the wedding gown crumpled on the floor, the bathroom light still on behind her. His eyes moved with the methodical patience of a man accustomed to reading environments before reading people. Then he looked at her. "You didn't eat at the reception," he said. She blinked. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that wasn't on the list. "I wasn't hungry." "You need to eat." "I said I wasn't hungry." A pause. His jaw shifted slightly, the only crack in that granite expression. "There's food downstairs. I'll have someone bring it up." "I don't want food." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated herself for it. "I don't want anything. I just want—" She stopped, swallowed, looked away. He took a step closer. Everything inside her went cold. It was involuntary, the way her body reacted. A full system lockdown that started in her spine and spread outward until her hands were shaking and her vision narrowed and her feet were already moving backward before her brain had finished processing the threat. She hit the edge of the bed frame with the back of her knees and stumbled, catching herself on the mattress with one hand. "Please," she whispered. And there it was again. That word. The word that had lived in her mouth since she was 14 years old. The word that never worked, but she couldn't stop saying, "Please don't touch me." Rome stopped. Not the hesitant stop of a man deciding what to do. The total stop. Like someone had hit a switch. His right foot was mid-stride, and he planted it and went completely still, his hands at his sides, his breathing even, his eyes locked on her face with an intensity that made her feel like she was being x-rayed. The robe had shifted when she stumbled. The left side slipped off her shoulder and hung loose against her arm. And in the amber glow of the bedside lamp, everything that the wedding gown and the makeup and the careful layering of silk had been designed to hide was suddenly visible. Bruises. Not the kind you get from bumping into furniture. The kind that come from hands. Specific. Deliberate. Five-fingered grip stamped into her upper arm in varying stages of healing. Dark purple, fading to green, fading to yellow, overlapping like a grotesque paint palette. Below them, on the inside of her forearm, three thin cuts in parallel lines. Fresh enough that the edges were still pink and slightly raised. And beneath those, older scars, silvery, flat, precise, that traced patterns too uniform to be accidental. The room changed. She felt it happen. The air itself shifted like the barometric pressure had dropped before a storm. Rome's expression didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Something dark and heavy and very, very old that surfaced for exactly 2 seconds before he locked it back down. He took a slow step backward, then another, until there were 6 feet between them and his back was nearly against the door. Who did that? Not a question, a demand. Low and flat and stripped of every ounce of charm or diplomacy. She pulled the robe back over her shoulder with shaking fingers. Nobody. Serafina. It doesn't matter. It matters. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that people who'd been around dangerous men recognized as more threatening than shouting. Who did that? She shook her head. The tears came back, but she fought them down, pressing her lips together until they went white. You don't want to get involved in this. I'm already involved. You're in my house. You have my name. That makes it my problem. I'm not your problem. I'm your transaction. The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. That's what this is. That's what I am. Conrad needed something from you, and I was the price. So here I am, paid in full. Silence. Rome's right hand opened and closed once. The scar tissue across his knuckles went white with the pressure. Conrad did this, he said. It wasn't a question anymore. He'd already worked it out. She could see it in the way his posture had changed. The slight forward shift of his center of gravity, the subtle squaring of his shoulders, the way his jaw had locked into a position that looked like it might never unlock again. She didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. How long? It doesn't... How long, Serafina? The way he said her name broke something. Not aggressively. Not impatiently. He said it the way you'd say the name of something you'd just realized was more fragile than you initially thought. Careful. Almost gentle. And that was somehow worse than cruelty because she knew how to survive cruelty. She had no defense against kindness. Since I was 14, she said, and the words came out like they'd been buried alive and had just clawed their way to the surface. 9 years. Rome didn't react visibly, but she watched his right hand reach behind him and find the door handle. Not to leave, but to grip it, to hold on to something solid while the information landed. 9 years. She was 23. She'd been living in that man's house, under that man's control, absorbing that man's violence for 9 years. Every press conference, every campaign dinner, every family Christmas photo that ran in the papers. 9 years of standing behind Conrad Vale with her chin up and her sleeves long and her mouth shut. He's a senator, Serafina added, and there was something almost like a dark laugh in her voice. Untouchable. You know how it works. Men like him don't get caught. They get reelected. Rome released the door handle. He reached up slowly, visibly slowly, deliberately, slowly, and pulled a chair from the corner of the room. He set it against the far wall, 6 feet from where she stood, and sat down in it, leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, looking at her the way a man looks at a map when he's planning a route through hostile territory. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and I need you to answer honestly. She said nothing. Are you safe here, right now, in this room, with me? The question hit her sideways. Nobody had ever asked her that. Not the school counselors who'd noticed the flinching, not the family doctor who'd treated her broken wrist and written "fell downstairs" in the chart. Not her own mother, dead since Serafina was 11, replaced 6 months later by Conrad's campaign image, and a stepfather who viewed his new daughter as property. I don't know, she said, honest, raw, stripped bare. Rome nodded once. Fair enough. He stood up, moved the chair back to its original position, walked to the door. Your room will be locked from the inside only. I'll have the outside lock disabled within the hour. 2 guards will be posted in the hallway, both women, both armed. Nobody enters this room without your permission, including me. He opened the door. Especially me, he added, without turning around. Then he was gone. The door closed softly. And 30 seconds later she heard voices in the hallway, brief and low. followed by the sound of footsteps repositioning. Serafina stood in the center of the room for a long time. Then she walked to the door and turned the lock from the inside. It engaged with a solid click. She tested it twice, 3 times, pressed her palm flat against the wood, and felt the barrier between herself and everything on the other side. It was the first locked door in 9 years that existed to keep people out, instead of keeping her in. She slid to the floor again. This time, when the tears came, she let them. The next morning cracked gray and cold through the windows she'd opened sometime after midnight, needing to feel air that didn't belong to anyone. Serafina woke on the floor beside the bed. Not in it, never in it, because beds meant vulnerability, and she'd stopped sleeping in beds at Conrad's house years ago. She'd curl up on the closet floor or wedge herself between the wall and the dresser, anywhere she could put her back against something solid and see the door. A tray sat outside her room when she opened it. Coffee, toast, fruit, scrambled eggs. No note. One of the female guards, a tall woman with short dark hair and a calm professional face, nodded at her. Mr. Moretti asked that you eat when you're ready. No rush. Serafina took the tray inside and stared at it for 10 minutes before eating a single piece of toast. She didn't see Rome for the rest of the day. She heard him, though. His voice carried through the old bones of the mansion the way thunder travels through mountain valleys, low and distant and impossible to ignore. He was on the phone for most of the morning. Short, clipped conversations in English that occasionally lapsed into Italian when his patience ran thin. She caught fragments from the stairwell when she finally left her room in the afternoon, trailing her hand along the wall like a patient testing the boundaries of a new ward. I don't care what the contract says. The terms changed. A pause. Then tell Marchetti to come see me himself. I'll explain the changes in person. Another pause, longer this time. He sold me damaged goods and he knew it. That changes the calculus of every deal he's ever brought to this table. Every single one. Serafina stopped on the stairs. Damaged goods. The phrase attached itself to the bruises on her arms and the scars on her wrists and the cracked rib beneath her borrowed robe, and it burned with a shame so familiar it almost felt like home. She retreated to her room. That evening, a different kind of tray appeared. Dinner, chicken, roasted vegetables, a glass of water, and a glass of wine, plus a small paper bag from a pharmacy containing over-the-counter painkillers, antiseptic cream, and adhesive bandages. Still no note. She ate the chicken, used the cream on the cuts, left the wine untouched. Alcohol had been Conrad's fuel, and the smell of it made her stomach close like a fist. On the third day, she finally saw him again. She'd made it to the library on the second floor, a vast, overstuffed room with leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books that looked like they'd actually been read. She was standing by the window, watching the Atlantic churn against the cliffs below the estate, when Rome appeared in the doorway. He didn't enter. He leaned against the frame with his arms crossed and looked at her for a moment before speaking. You haven't left this floor in 3 days. You're tracking me? I have cameras. It's my house. That's not exactly comforting. The faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one that had died a long time ago. The grounds are yours to use. Pool, garden, kitchen, anything on the east side. West Wing is off limits. That's where business happens. You don't want to be around that. What kind of business? The kind you already know about. Your stepfather didn't trade you to a banker. She flinched at the word traded. He noticed. She saw him notice because his arms uncrossed and his hands went into his pockets. A deliberate effort to make himself look smaller, less threatening. It was such a conscious gesture from such a physically imposing man that it momentarily short-circuited her fear. I need to ask you something, he said. You keep saying that, because I keep having questions. He paused, looked down at the floor, then back at her. The things Conrad's involved in, money laundering, the connections to the Petrov syndicate, the shipments through the port in Baltimore. How much do you know? Her blood iced. Why? Because if you know what I think you know, you're not just a bargaining chip, you're a liability. And liabilities in this world don't retire, they disappear. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. I know enough, she said quietly. I know about the accounts in the Caymans. I know about the shipments, not drugs, people, women, girls, funneled through shell companies tied to his campaign donors. I know because he made me help with the paperwork when I was 17, said it was educational. Her laugh was bitter and airless. His insurance policy. If I ever talked, I was complicit. Rome's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room did. She could feel it, a coldness emanating from him that had nothing to do with the ocean air coming through the windows. He trafficked people, Rome said. Each word was measured and weighted like a stone being placed on a scale. He facilitated it, made it possible, took his cut and looked the other way while other men did the actual moving. And you have proof. I have everything. Dates, names, account numbers, copies of every document he ever made me process. She paused. It's the only reason I'm still alive. He can't kill me without knowing where the copies are. Rome was quiet for a long time. The ocean crashed below them. Wind pressed against the windows. Where are the copies? He asked. Somewhere he'll never find them. That's not what I asked. And that's not something I'm telling you. She met his eyes for the first time. Really met them. Not the glancing, flinching eye contact she'd managed before. You're a mafia boss. He's a senator. You're both dangerous men who've both used me for your own reasons. The fact that you gave me painkillers and a locked door doesn't mean I trust you. The word should have angered him. She braced for it. The flash, the raised voice, the hand. The whole body preparation that Conrad had trained into her like muscle memory. Instead, Rome nodded. Good, he said. You shouldn't. Then he pushed off the doorframe and turned to leave. Moretti. He stopped. The woman you posted outside my door, the one with the short hair. Dominique. She's armed. Yes. With what? Sig Sauer P365. Compact, reliable. If someone comes for me and gets past her, what am I supposed to do? Rome looked back over his shoulder. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and for a moment she saw something behind them that she couldn't name. Not pity, not attraction, something older, something that looked a lot like recognition. Nobody's getting past Dominique, he said. That's not an answer. Then here's an answer. Tomorrow morning I'm having a safe installed in your room. Combination lock, only you'll know the code. Inside it, there'll be a phone with 3 numbers programmed. Mine, Dominique's, and a lawyer who works for me but whose privilege extends to you independently. There'll also be a Glock 19, loaded, with a manual safety. Her breath caught. You're giving me a gun. I'm giving you a choice. You've never had one before. He paused in the doorway. Whether you point it at the people trying to hurt you or at me, that's up to you. He left, and Serafina stood in the library with the Atlantic roaring beneath her and the ghosts of 9 years pressing against the inside of her skull, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt something other than fear. She felt dangerous. 4 days in, and the world outside the Moretti estate was already starting to burn. Serafina didn't know this yet. She was still mapping the interior geography of her gilded cage, learning which hallways echoed, which staircases the guards used, which rooms smelled like old cigar smoke and whiskey, and secrets she wasn't supposed to know. But beneath the surface of Rome's empire, fault lines were shifting. The first call came on a Tuesday night. She heard it through the floor, Rome's voice, 2 stories below, stripped of its usual controlled calm. He was shouting. Not the performative shouting of a man making a point. The real kind. The kind that comes through clenched teeth. Then silence. Then the sound of something heavy hitting a wall. The next morning, Dominique's partner, a stocky woman named Reeves with kind eyes and a scar across her chin, was posted alone. When Serafina asked where Dominique was, Reeves said, reassigned, temporarily. Reassigned where? Reeves hesitated. Mr. Moretti needed her on perimeter detail. There was an incident last night. What kind of incident? The kind I'm not authorized to discuss. Serafina let it go. But she watched. She'd spent 9 years surviving by reading rooms and noticing shifts in atmosphere, and the atmosphere inside the Moretti compound was changing. More men appeared. Guards who hadn't been there before, harder looking, carrying weapons they didn't bother concealing. Vehicles came and went at odd hours. Phone calls at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. On the 5th night, she woke to the sound of tires screaming on wet pavement somewhere beyond the estate walls. Then a sharp crack that could have been thunder, but wasn't. Gunfire. She was on the floor before the second shot. Not hiding. Positioning. Back against the wall, eyes on the door, fingers already reaching toward the safe beside her bed. She punched in the code. Her hands were shaking, but they found the Glock in the dark like they'd been doing it for years. The shots stopped. Voices shouted in the distance. Then engines, fading. 15 minutes later, a knock on her door. Dominique's voice. Ma'am, the compound is secure. Stay in your room. Serafina sat on the floor with the gun in her lap and her back against the cold wall, and she didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, she found Rome in the kitchen. He was alone for once, sitting at the massive marble island with a cup of black coffee and a phone face down on the counter. His knuckles were freshly split, two of them on the right hand, blood dried in the creases. He didn't try to hide it. What happened last night, she said. Not a question. Rome looked at her. He looked tired. Not the performative tiredness of a man seeking sympathy, but the genuine marrow-deep exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying weight for too long without setting it down. Your stepfather happened. Her stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means Conrad Vale is not happy about our arrangement. He expected a business deal, a quiet exchange. Instead, he's getting calls from my people asking uncomfortable questions about documents and shipments and accounts that he thought were buried. Rome took a sip of coffee. Last night, someone took shots at the East Gate. Small crew, poorly organized, sent a message more than anything, a warning. From Conrad? From the people Conrad works with. The Petrov Syndicate doesn't send senators to do their dirty work. They send bullets first. Then they send bodies. He set the coffee down. Which means you were right. What you know, those documents, those names, it scares them. And scared men with money and connections don't negotiate, they eliminate. The word eliminate sat between them like a loaded weapon. So what happens now? She asked. Rome looked at her, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Not much, just a fracture, a hairline crack in the granite. But she saw it. Behind the control and the calculation and the reputation that preceded him like a shockwave, there was a man staring at a problem that didn't have a clean solution. Now, he said, we find out exactly how far they're willing to go. He didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Serafina returned to her room after a walk in the garden to find something on her pillow that stopped her heart. A necklace. Thin gold chain. Small pendant. Covered in something dark and dried that she recognized immediately because she'd seen her own blood on enough surfaces to know its color when it aged. The necklace was her mother's. It had been buried with her. Serafina didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood in the doorway of her room and felt something inside her chest shut down. A circuit breaker flipping, a system going offline to prevent catastrophic overload. She stared at the necklace on the white pillowcase, and her mind processed the implications with the cold clarity of someone who'd been trained by trauma to think instead of feel. Someone had been in her room. Inside the Moretti compound. Past the guards, past the cameras, past Dominique and Reeves, and every armed man patrolling the estate. They'd come in, placed this on her pillow, and left. They could have killed her. They wanted her to know that. When Rome saw the necklace, she watched his face go through something she'd never seen before. The controlled calm didn't just crack. It collapsed. For 3 full seconds, the mask was gone, and what lived underneath was so raw and so furious that she took an involuntary step backward, even though the rage wasn't directed at her. He picked up the necklace with 2 fingers, held it to the light, and stared at the dried blood like he was memorizing it. Then he looked at her. Pack a bag, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout she'd ever heard. We're leaving tonight. Where? Somewhere they can't reach you. Nowhere is pack a bag, the way he said it. Not angry at her, but angry at everything around her. Angry at the walls for not being strong enough, and the guards for not being sharp enough, and the world for producing men who'd dig up a dead woman's jewelry to terrorize her daughter. Made Serafina realize something she wasn't prepared for. Rome Moretti wasn't trying to own her. He was trying to protect her, and that terrified her more than anything Conrad had ever done. Because protection meant trust, and trust meant vulnerability. And vulnerability in her experience had only ever been a weapon that other people used against her. She packed the bag. Outside, the Atlantic screamed against the cliffs, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the estate walls, powerful men with political connections and unlimited resources were sharpening their knives. The war hadn't started yet, but the first blood had already been drawn. The convoy left the Moretti estate at 2:47 in the morning under a moonless sky that bled black into the Atlantic. 3 armored SUVs, no headlights until they hit the county road 4 miles out. Rome rode in the middle vehicle with Serafina in the back seat, Her bag between her feet and the Glock he'd given her tucked inside her coat pocket with the safety on because she'd checked it 4 times before getting in the car, and she'd check it again before getting out. She didn't ask where they were going. Rome didn't offer. The silence between them was thick and heavy and complicated in ways neither of them had the energy to unpack at 3 in the morning with dried blood on a dead woman's necklace sealed in an evidence bag in the trunk. Dominique drove. Her eyes never left the mirrors. 6 hours into the drive, somewhere on a stretch of interstate cutting through Pennsylvania, Rome's phone buzzed. He answered it without greeting. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. Longer. His jaw tightened. Hold the perimeter. Nobody in, nobody out. I'll handle it when we're settled. He hung up and stared through the windshield at the gray nothing of pre-dawn highway. What happened? Serafina said. My casino in Atlantic City. Car bomb in the parking structure. Detonated 40 minutes ago. Anyone hurt? He looked at her. The fact that she'd asked. The fact that her first response wasn't about her own safety, but about strangers in a parking garage, registered on his face like a small, unexpected wound. 2 of my men. One's critical. The building's intact, but the message is clear. They're escalating. They're panicking. There's a difference. He turned back to the window. Panicked men make mistakes. The trick is surviving long enough to let them. They drove through the rest of Pennsylvania, across the blunt gray expanse of Ohio, through Indiana, and into the wide-open flatlands of the Midwest, where the sky pressed down like a lid, and the horizon went on forever. Serafina slept in fragments, 10 minutes here, 20 there, jerking awake each time the car hit a bump or changed speed, her hand finding the gun in her pocket before her eyes fully opened. Rome didn't sleep at all. She knew, because every time she woke, he was in exactly the same position, sitting upright, jaw set, eyes forward, that particular stillness of a man whose mind was running calculations his body couldn't afford to display. They switched vehicles twice. Once at a rest stop outside Des Moines, where a man in a plain gray sedan was waiting with keys and a nod, and nothing else. Once at a private airstrip in Wyoming, where a twin-engine Cessna was fueled and ready on a cracked tarmac runway. The plane took them north. Below, the landscape shifted from brown plains to green forests to white. Mountains materialized through the windows like the earth was building walls around them. Montana. The safe house sat at the end of a 12-mile dirt road that wound through dense pine forest before dead-ending at a clearing overlooking a frozen valley. Not a cabin, a compound, smaller than the estate, but built for function. Reinforced concrete beneath timber framing. Satellite communications array on the roof. Generator building 30 yards east. A perimeter of motion sensors and cameras disguised as rocks and tree stumps, mapped to a monitoring station in the basement. Rome had built this place 3 years ago. For exactly this kind of situation. Dominique and a skeleton crew of 4 operatives secured the perimeter while Serafina stood in the main room. Stone fireplace, heavy furniture, windows reinforced with ballistic film, and felt the silence of the mountains press against her eardrums like a physical thing. No ocean, no city noise, no footsteps in hallways, just wind and trees and the distant sound of something frozen cracking under its own weight. You'll take the room at the end of the hall, Rome said, setting bags on the kitchen counter. Same setup as before, locks on the inside, Dominique's across the hall. And you? Downstairs. There's a situation room. I'll be there most of the time. Running your empire from a bunker in Montana. He stopped unpacking and looked at her. Running what's left of it. Conrad's people hit the casino. Before that, someone put a bullet through the window of my restaurant in Philadelphia. My shipping contacts in Baltimore have gone silent. Every one of them. In the last 72 hours, I've lost access to 3 accounts, 2 properties, and the loyalty of at least a dozen men who decided a senator with federal connections is a safer bet than a mobster with a target on his back. The honesty was disarming. Men like Rome, men like Conrad, didn't admit weakness. They buried it under threats and bravado and let everyone else guess what was real. Rome was handing her his vulnerabilities like ammunition. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you're smart enough to figure it out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me than piece it together from overheard phone calls and fill in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. The worst-case scenario is that we're trapped in the mountains while your enemies dismantle everything you built, and my stepfather sends people to finish what that necklace started. That's not worst case, that's current case. He closed the bag. Worst case is what happens if they find out what you know before we can use it. There it was. The pivot. The reason she was here. The reason he'd driven through the night and abandoned his own territory. It wasn't charity. It wasn't even protection in the simple sense. She was leverage. She carried information that could destroy Conrad and the Petrov Syndicate and every politician with dirty hands in between. And Rome needed that information to survive. You want my files, she said. I want to stay alive, so do you. Those files are the only thing keeping both of us breathing. And if I give them to you, what happens to my insurance policy? Right now, Conrad can't kill me because he doesn't know where the copies are. The second you have them, I become expendable. You're not. Don't. Her voice was sharp enough to cut. Don't tell me I'm not expendable. I've been expendable my entire life. I was expendable when my mother died and Conrad moved in. I was expendable when he started hitting me and nobody noticed. I was expendable when he dressed me up and sold me to you like a party favor. So don't stand there in your safe house with your guns and your soldiers and tell me I matter, because the only thing that matters to men like you is what I can provide. The words hit the room like a concussion grenade. Dominique, who'd been checking windows in the next room, stopped moving. The silence was so complete Serafina could hear the generator humming outside. Rome stood very still. His hands were flat on the counter. His knuckles, still split from whatever wall he'd hit back at the estate, pressed white against the granite. You're right, he said. She blinked. You're right that men have used you. You're right that trust is a trap, and that everything I've done, the guards, the gun, the locked doors, could be strategy, could be manipulation. He lifted his hands from the counter slowly, deliberately. But I'm going to tell you something, and you can believe it or not because I'm done trying to convince people of things they need to see for themselves. He took a breath. The kind that comes before something heavy. I watched my mother die in a house like this. Not this house, a different one. I was 15. She'd married a man named Vincent Corsetti. Old money. Connected. The kind of man who bought art and donated to museums and beat his wife unconscious on Tuesday nights because dinner was cold. Rome's voice didn't waver, but his eyes went somewhere else, somewhere far back and very dark. She tried to leave twice. Both times he found her. Both times it got worse. The third time she didn't try to leave. She just stopped. Stopped eating. Stopped talking. Stopped being the woman I remembered. And one morning she didn't wake up. The fire crackled. The coroner wrote cardiac arrest. His friends at the precinct made sure the file was thin. Nobody asked questions because nobody wanted the answers. Rome looked at Serafina directly. I was 15 and I couldn't protect her. I built everything I have, every gun, every soldier, every dollar, because I swore I'd never be that helpless again. You can call that a savior complex or a justification for violence, and you'd probably be right about both. But when I saw those bruises on your arms, I didn't see a transaction. I saw her. The room was so quiet, Serafina could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She didn't speak for a long time, neither did he. The confession hung between them like a bridge, visible, crossable, but neither of them certain it would hold the weight. Finally she said, That doesn't mean I trust you. I know. But I'll give you the files. He looked up. Not all of them. Not yet. Enough to start. Enough to make Conrad sweat. The rest stays where it is until I decide otherwise. She paused. And I decide. Not you. Not your lawyers. Not anyone. Me. Rome nodded slowly. Okay. One more thing. What? If you ever use what happened to your mother to manipulate me, if I find out any part of that story was engineered to gain my trust, I will put every document I have in a federal prosecutor's hands and burn you right alongside Conrad. We clear? Something moved across his face. Not anger. Something closer to respect. The kind you give someone who's survived enough to know that every open hand might be hiding a blade. We're clear, he said. The first 3 days in Montana passed in a tense, fragile rhythm. Serafina spent mornings walking the perimeter with Dominique, learning the terrain, mapping exit routes in her head, the way Conrad had inadvertently taught her. Always know where the doors are. Always know which windows open. Always have a path. Afternoons she spent in her room, transcribing information from memory onto a legal pad Rome had provided. Account numbers, routing codes, Names and dates and transaction records she'd memorized over 6 years of being Conrad's unwilling bookkeeper. Rome spent most of his time in the basement situation room, on encrypted calls that left him looking progressively more hollowed out each day. She'd see him surface around midnight, moving through the kitchen like a ghost, pouring coffee. He barely drank, staring at maps spread across the dining table with the expression of a general watching his territory shrink. They didn't talk much. When they did, it was transactional, short, careful. Two people circling each other with the guarded awareness of animals who'd both been hurt by humans. On the fourth night, that pattern shattered. Serafina woke screaming, not the half-conscious whimper she usually managed to muffle before it escaped. A full, throat-tearing scream that ripped through the cabin and brought Dominique crashing through the hallway door with her weapon drawn. The nightmare was the same one she'd had since she was 16. Conrad's study. The door locking. His hand around her wrist, always the left one, always the same grip, tight enough to grind the bones. The belt. The wall. The taste of copper in her mouth. And then the worst part, the part that woke her up every time. His voice afterward, calm and measured, saying, "This is your fault. You know that, right? If you just listened, I wouldn't have to do this." She was on the floor when Dominique found her, back against the wall. Knees to her chest, hyperventilating. The Glock was in her hand and she didn't remember picking it up. "Serafina." Dominique's voice was steady, professional, no panic. "You're in Montana. You're safe. Put the gun down." It took her 90 seconds. She counted each one. Then her fingers unclenched and the gun clattered to the floor, and she pressed both hands over her face and tried to breathe through the shaking. Footsteps on the stairs. Rome appeared behind Dominique, still dressed. He hadn't been sleeping either. He took one look at the scene and stopped in the hallway. Didn't enter, didn't try to help, just stood there, framed in the doorway, and waited. "I'm fine," Serafina said. Her voice was wrecked. "You're not fine," Dominique said quietly. "And that's okay." "I said I'm fine." "Then why is your hand bleeding?" She looked down. Her right palm had a shallow cut across it. She'd gripped the Glock so hard the textured grip had bitten into her skin. Blood pooled in the lines of her hand like red ink in a road map. Rome's voice came from the hallway, low, controlled. "Dominique, first aid kit's in the kitchen. Lower cabinet, left of the sink." Dominique holstered her weapon and left. Serafina stayed on the floor. Rome stayed in the hall, 10 feet of hardwood floor between them, and neither made a move to close the distance. "How often?" he said. "Every night." "Since when?" "Since always." I was quiet. Then, "My mother used to wake up screaming too, same time every night, around 3. I'd hear it through the walls and I'd put my pillow over my head because I was 15 and I didn't know what to do." His voice was steady, but she could hear the cost of steadiness in the way each word was carefully weighted and released. "I'm not 15 anymore, and I still don't know what to do, but I'm not putting the pillow over my head this time." It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. She didn't respond. Dominique came back with the first aid kit and cleaned the cut and wrapped her hand and didn't mention the tears on Serafina's face, because Dominique was the kind of woman who understood that sometimes dignity was the only thing a person had left. Rome disappeared back downstairs. The next morning, there was a small white noise machine outside her door with a note in handwriting that was surprisingly neat for a man with scarred hands. "Helps with the 3 a.m. thing, R." She didn't use it the first night, or the second. On the third night she plugged it in, and the low static hum filled the room, and she slept for 4 consecutive hours, the longest unbroken stretch she'd managed in years. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask her to. A week into Montana, the outside world caught up with them. Rome's phone call came at 6:14 in the morning. Serafina was in the kitchen making coffee. A small domestic act that felt surreal in the context of a fortified safe house surrounded by armed guards. She heard his voice from the stairwell, sharp and rising. "Say that again, slowly." A long silence. "Who authorized it?" Another silence. Then a sound she'd never heard from him. A short, harsh exhale that was almost a laugh, but carried zero humor. The sound of a man who'd just been stabbed by a hand he trusted. He came up the stairs 2 at a time. His face was different. Not angry. That would have been easier to read. This was something worse. This was the face of a man recalculating every assumption he'd made about the people around him. Get Dominique, he said to Serafina. Now. She got Dominique. The three of them stood in the main room while Rome paced. 3 steps left, 3 steps right, hands locked behind his head, the muscles in his jaw working like he was physically chewing the information before swallowing it. Nico Ferraro, he said. Dominique went still. What about him? He sold us. The name meant nothing to Serafina, but it clearly meant everything to the other 2 people in the room. Dominique's hand moved to her hip, not reaching for the weapon, just touching it, confirming it was there. A reflex. That's not possible, Dominique said. Nico's been with you since we were 18, since before any of this, since before the organization existed. Rome stopped pacing. He's been feeding information to the Petrov syndicate for 6 months. Account access, property locations, personnel rotations. The casino bombing wasn't a lucky guess. Nico gave them the security schedule. The breach at the estate, the necklace on Serafina's pillow. That wasn't an outside job. Nico gave someone the entry codes. The silence that followed was absolute. He knows about this place, Dominique said. Yes. He knows the access roads, the perimeter layout, the communication frequencies. Yes. Rome, I know. Serafina looked between them. The implication was obvious even to someone outside the inner circle. The safe house, the fortified, hidden, supposedly unreachable compound at the end of a 12-mile dirt road in the Montana wilderness, was compromised. Had been compromised before they ever arrived. How long do we have? Serafina asked. Rome looked at her. Behind the fury and the betrayal, she saw the calculation happening in real time. Variables being weighted, scenarios being run, odds being tallied. Nico knows I know. My source confirmed he went dark 2 hours ago. Phone off, apartment cleared out, car abandoned at Newark Airport. He's either running or repositioning. Rome's voice was flat, clinical. The voice of a man compartmentalizing everything personal about this betrayal and filing it under a category he'd deal with later, if there was a later. If he's running, we have days. If he's already given the location to Conrad's people, we have hours. Then we leave, Serafina said. Right now. We get in a car and go where? Rome's voice cracked for the first time. Not with weakness, with frustration. The raw, grinding frustration of a man who'd built fortress after fortress only to have the walls torn down from the inside. I have 3 safe houses. Nico knows all of them. I have 12 properties under shell companies. Nico set up half the paperwork. Every bolt hole, every escape route, every backup plan I've built over 15 years has his fingerprints on it. The weight of that settled over the room like snowfall. Slow and suffocating. My best friend, Rome said, and the words came out like something being ripped from his chest with pliers. The man I trusted with everything, with my mother's memory, with the locations of every person under my protection. He looked at his own hands like he didn't recognize them. He sold all of it, every safe house, every name. For what? Control of the empire? Money? Was it always there the whole time and I just... Stop! Dominique's voice cut through like a blade. You can bleed about this later. Right now we need to move. She's right, Serafina said. Nico is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight the problem is that people might already be coming. Rome looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. A recalibration. She'd seen it once before, in the library back at the estate, when she'd demanded the gun. The look of a man adjusting his assessment of the person in front of him. The documents, he said. The files you've been writing out. Where are they? In the safe in my room. Get them, all of them, plus whatever's on the legal pads. If we're running, I need to know where. Nowhere Nico knows. Somewhere I haven't been in years. Somewhere that doesn't exist in any file or database or conversation he's ever been part of. Does such a place exist? Rome was quiet for a beat. Then, one maybe. It belonged to my mother before she married Corsetti. A property in the Catskills she bought under her maiden name when she was 22. Never transferred, never recorded in any business document. I haven't been there since I was a kid. If it's been empty for 20 years, then it's a ruin. I know. But ruins don't show up on Nico Ferraro's maps. Dominique was already moving. Radio to the perimeter team. Instructions. Clean, precise, rapid fire. Disable the comm array. Wipe the servers. Pack essential gear and weapons. 2 vehicles. Staggered departure. Southern route through the pass if the roads are clear. Serafina went to her room. She grabbed the legal pads from the safe, stuffed them into a waterproof bag, and slung it over her shoulder. Then she stopped. The white noise machine sat on the nightstand, its cord trailing to the wall, its small digital display glowing a faint blue in the dim room. She unplugged it and put it in the bag. She didn't examine why. Downstairs, Rome was loading weapons into a duffel when she came back. He moved with the efficiency of muscle memory, checking magazines, racking slides, distributing ammunition into pockets and pouches, with the fluid precision of a man who'd done this too many times. Serafina. What? He stopped loading, looked at her directly. If something happens on the road, if we get separated, if I go down, you take the files and you go to the lawyer, Marcus Webb. His number's in your phone. You give him everything and you let him burn it all down. Conrad, the Petrov Syndicate, every name on those lists. You don't wait for me. You don't come back for me. You run and you don't stop until every one of those men is in a cell or in the ground. Don't talk like that. I'm being realistic. No, you're being dramatic. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder. You're not dying on a mountain road in Montana. That's not how this ends. You don't know how this ends. Neither do you. That's the point. So stop writing eulogies and start driving. Something passed between them. Quick. Electric. The kind of exchange that happens when two people who've spent their lives guarding every vulnerable inch of themselves accidentally let the guard slip for half a second. Then it was gone, and Rome zipped the duffel and nodded once. They moved out at 8:31 p.m. 2 vehicles. Rome, Serafina, and Dominique in the lead. 3 operatives in the follow car. No headlights. The dirt road wound through pine forest, so dense the sky disappeared behind the canopy. 4 miles from the main road, Dominique slowed the vehicle. What? Rome said from the back seat. Tire tracks. Dominique's voice was careful. Fresh. 2 vehicles, maybe 3, headed up the road toward the compound. Silence. How fresh? Rome asked. Hours. Could be less. The car idled, engine rumbling, pine trees pressing close on both sides. The headlights of the follow car appeared in the rear view, dim and patient. They're already here, Serafina said quietly. Rome's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A text from an unknown number. 4 words. She belongs to us. He showed it to Dominique. Dominique's grip on the steering wheel tightened until the leather creaked. Turn around? She asked. No. Forward. Fast. Dominique floored it. The SUV lurched forward on the dirt road, tires biting gravel, and Serafina braced herself against the door as the forest blurred past. Her hand found the Glock in her coat. The safety was off. She didn't remember switching it. Behind them, from somewhere up the mountain, she heard the first distant crack of gunfire, followed by the low, rolling thud of an explosion that lit the trees orange for a single terrible second. The safe house was burning. They'd missed the kill team by less than an hour. Rome turned in his seat and looked through the rear window at the glow above the tree line. His face was lit by the fire, amber and shadow, fury, and something else, something quieter. The look of a man watching the last bridge behind him collapse into the river. There was no going back now. There was no safe place left. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, on roads that didn't appear on any map, a woman carrying the secrets that could destroy an empire gripped a gun she'd learned to hold less than 2 weeks ago and stared into the black Montana night, and understood, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable, that the next time powerful men came for her, she would not be trembling. She would be ready. But in the follow car behind them, invisible in the dark, one of Rome's 3 remaining operatives, quietly powered on a second phone, typed a set of coordinates into an encrypted message and hit send. The traitor wasn't just Nico. It never was. The second phone never made a sound. That was the thing about professional betrayal. It didn't announce itself. It didn't shake or hesitate or leave fingerprints on the air. It was quiet and clean and surgical. And by the time you understood what had happened, the wound was already deep enough to be fatal. Serafina didn't know about the phone in the follow car. Neither did Rome. They were moving at 60 miles an hour down a dirt road in the dark, with the Montana mountains burning orange in the rear view and absolutely nowhere left to run, and the coordinates were already traveling through encrypted channels toward men who got paid to close distances fast. Dominique hit the main road and turned south without being told. Rome had his phone open, 3 different screens cycling through satellite feeds from the compound's external cameras, all of them now showing fire. Not targeted fire. Total consumption. Whoever had come up that mountain hadn't been sent to capture. They'd been sent to erase. The follow car's still behind us, Dominique said. Rome checked the mirror. Headlights. 200 yards back. Steady. Who's in it? Carver, Reyes, and Mac. Mac's been with me 8 years, Rome said, more to himself than anyone else. Nico's been with you 15. Dominique's voice was flat. She wasn't being cruel. She was being precise. Rome's jaw locked. They drove in silence for 40 minutes, putting distance between themselves and the fire. The mountains fell away behind them, and the road flattened into a 2-lane state highway cutting through forest so dark it felt like driving through a tunnel. The follow car maintained its distance. Patient, constant, like a shadow that had learned to drive. Outside Billings, Dominique pulled into a gas station, one of those enormous truck stops that ran 24 hours because the highways didn't sleep. Bright fluorescent lights, 18-wheelers idling in rows, the smell of diesel and burnt coffee, and the particular exhaustion of people traveling toward things they weren't sure they wanted. Rome got out first, stretched, scanned the lot with the practiced sweep of a man who'd learned never to stop moving his eyes. The follow car pulled in and parked 2 bays over. Carver, a compact man with a shaved head and a calm face, got out first, followed by Reyes. Max stayed in the car a beat longer than necessary. Rome noticed, filed it, said nothing. Inside the gas station, Serafina stood in the snack aisle, holding a bottle of water and staring at nothing, the kind of stare that had nothing to do with what was in front of her. Her hands were steady, steadier than they'd been back at the compound, but her breathing was shallow and her eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits and angles and the position of every person in the building. The clerk behind the counter, 2 truckers by the coffee machines, a woman with a sleeping toddler near the door. Rome appeared beside her, picked up a bottle of water himself, didn't look at her directly. "When we leave here," he said quietly, low enough that it barely carried past her ear, "tell me you notice something wrong and you can't get back in the car." She went very still. "Which car?" "The follow car." His reflection was visible in the glass-fronted refrigerator case across the aisle. Watching Mac through the window without appearing to watch Mac through the window. Third man. He had his phone face down on his knee the whole drive, changed it to his inside pocket when we stopped. That could be nothing. It could be. But the last time I missed a signal like that, someone put a bomb in my parking garage. She didn't respond. She picked up a second water bottle, set it back, picked up a packet of crackers, the mundane geometry of a woman buying snacks, her hands moving through the motions while her mind ran the math. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "Buy time. 2 minutes." She nodded once, microscopic. He moved toward the counter. She went to find the bathroom and took a deliberately wrong turn that looped her past the window, where she spent 45 seconds pretending to look at a rotating rack of local maps while watching Mac in the car outside. I was looking at his phone, both hands. The kind of focus you give a message, not a screen. She went back to the aisle, gathered water, crackers, 2 protein bars, a road atlas, and a box of adhesive bandages she didn't need. Paid cash. Took her time with the change. By the time she walked out, Rome had Mac's door open. Not violently. Not with a weapon drawn. He'd simply walked to the car, opened the door, and leaned down to speak to Mac at eye level. The body language of a casual conversation between men who'd known each other for years. But Mac's face had gone the color of old concrete, and his hands were visible on his knees, spread open, the instinctive display of a man who'd been caught and knew better than to reach for anything. Carver and Reyes had positioned themselves flanking the vehicle without being asked. Trained, seamless. Either they were loyal or they were very good actors. Serafina got in the lead vehicle with Dominique and sat in the back seat and watched through the windshield. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She couldn't hear words. She read bodies. Rome crouched at the car door, completely still, no performance, no threat display. Mac talking. Too much talking. The verbal hemorrhage of a man trying to justify the unjustifiable with volume. At one point, Mac's hands came up, palms out, the universal gesture of "I had no choice." Rome straightened, stepped back 1 step, looked at the ground for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Carver and said something. Carver reached into the car, took Mac's phone, and put it in his own pocket. Mac got out of the car. Rome handed him something. His wallet, Serafina realized. She could see the brown leather from 30 yards away. Then Rome pointed down the highway, away from the gas station. Mac looked at the wallet, looked at the highway, looked at Rome. He started walking. Rome watched him until he was 50 yards away, then turned and came back to the lead vehicle. Got in the passenger seat, closed the door, didn't speak. Dominique looked at him in the mirror. Drive, Rome said. Dominique drove. Carver and Reyes took the follow car. 5 people now instead of 6, and the absence of the 6th was its own presence. A vacuum shaped like the particular betrayal of someone you'd trusted for 8 years. He's been passing location data since we left the estate, Rome said finally, the words coming out measured and evenly spaced like he was reading from a document he'd memorized. Not to Nico. Directly to a number he was given 48 hours before the wedding. Someone inside Conrad's operation with enough reach to place an inside man in my crew before the ceremony even happened. Serafina let that settle. They planned this before the wedding. Before the wedding. Which means Conrad wasn't just getting rid of me. He was using the marriage to get access to you, to your people, to your network. She paused. He didn't sell me to you. He infiltrated you through me. Rome was quiet for a long time. Outside the windows, the highway unspooled through darkness. How much did Mac give them? Dominique asked. The Montana location, our route out, our current vehicle descriptions. Rome reached up and rubbed the space between his eyes with 2 fingers. He didn't have the Catskills location because I hadn't mentioned it aloud yet. That's the only card we have left. The Catskills, Serafina said. Your mother's property. If it's still standing, if the road's passable, if 20 years of abandonment hasn't turned it into 4 walls and a floor. He dropped his hand. A lot of ifs. We don't have anything else. No, Rome said. We don't. They drove through the night again. Different rhythm this time. No longer fleeing with the urgency of people seconds ahead of something. Now they were moving carefully, strategically, changing lanes on the highway at irregular intervals. Pulling off twice to verify they weren't being tailed. Dominique's eyes never left the mirrors. Somewhere in South Dakota, Serafina fell into a real sleep for the first time in weeks. Not the fragmented, panic-threaded dozing of the past 10 days. An actual descent into unconsciousness that came without warning. One moment she was watching the white dashes of the highway disappear under the car, and the next she was gone. She woke 4 hours later to gray morning light and the sound of Rome's voice on the phone, low and contained, speaking to someone she didn't recognize. I need the access road cleared and basic utilities functional. Whatever you can do in 48 hours. A pause. Don't use any name I've used before. The property is registered to Elena Moretti, maiden name Vasquez. Yes, don't put it in writing. He ended the call. Serafina straightened in her seat. Her neck ached. The bag with the legal pads was still wedged between her feet where it had been since Montana. She checked it reflexively. She'd been doing this every time she woke up, confirming the documents were there, solid and real, the only weapon she actually owned. How long was I asleep? She asked. 4 hours. You could have woken me. You needed it. She looked at his profile. He was still in the passenger seat. Same position as hours ago, she suspected. Dominique had been replaced by Carver at the wheel somewhere in the night. The bags under Rome's eyes had deepened. His jaw carried 2 days of dark stubble. There was still dried blood in the cracks of his knuckles from the wall back at the estate. When did you last sleep? She asked. I don't remember. That's not a real answer. It's the only one I have. He glanced at her sideways. There's food in the bag behind the seat. Eat something. She ate a protein bar without tasting it and stared at the landscape outside. Flatter now, the mountains completely gone, the land stretching out in every direction like it was trying to escape itself. Tell me about her, Serafina said. Rome turned his head slightly. Your mother, Elena. She paused. You don't have to. But we have 6 more hours of driving, and the alternative is sitting here running worst-case scenarios. A long silence. The engine hummed. Carver didn't react at all. The particular neutrality of a professional who'd learned that what happened in the backseat of a car was none of his concern. She was 22 when she had me, Rome said finally. 22 and already on her own. Her family disowned her because my father was from the wrong neighborhood and the wrong family. She raised me in a 2-bedroom apartment in South Boston on a waitress salary and whatever she could pick up cleaning houses on weekends. He paused. She read to me every night, without exception. Didn't matter how tired she was. She'd come in smelling like whatever restaurant she'd worked that shift, and she'd sit on the edge of my bed and read until I fell asleep. His voice had changed, flattened in a way that wasn't coldness but control. The sound of a man holding something fragile between his hands, trying not to grip it too hard. She was the only person who ever loved me without needing anything in return. Serafina looked at her own hands in her lap. The bandaged one, the scarred one. When did Corsetti happen? I was 13. She met him at a function. She was catering it. He was charming, attentive. Told her she was beautiful, like it was information she deserved to have. Rome's voice went thinner. It was 6 months before I saw the first bruise. She told me she fell. I was 13. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. By the time I was 15 and stopped believing her, it was too far gone. He looked at the road ahead. After she died, I went after Corsetti myself. I was 16. I had a knife and 20 pounds less than him and no idea what I was doing. But bus. Serafina went still. What happened? He put me in the hospital. Rome said it the way you'd report weather. Factual. Stripped of drama. 3 broken ribs, fractured eye socket. He told the hospital I'd gotten into a street fight and paid someone to write that in the chart. Sent me a card in the hospital. Get well soon. Classic Corsetti. He paused. I spent the next 2 years learning everything I'd done wrong. Then I went back. The implication was clear and she didn't ask him to elaborate on it. She understood that some sentences were complete without their final words. The Catskills property, she said. That's where she was happy. For about 4 years. Before my father left, before the restaurant job, before everything that came after. Rome turned to look out his window. She called it her other life. The life that could have been if things had gone differently. They crossed into New York State just after noon, the landscape shifting from open plain to rolling hills covered in bare-limbed trees that stood like dark stitching against the pale winter sky. The Catskills emerged gradually, hills becoming mountains, mountains becoming something older and heavier and indifferent to human problems in the way that wilderness usually was. The access road was exactly as bad as Rome had predicted. Barely a road at all. 2 tire tracks through overgrown brush, the surface buckled by frost heave and tree roots. Carver navigated it at a crawl, the SUV rocking and scraping through sections where the track had nearly disappeared. It took 40 minutes to cover 3 miles. The property at the end of it was a timber frame house that time had been patient with, but not kind. The porch roof had caved on one side. The windows were intact. Thick old glass, wavy with age, still keeping the weather out. Inside, when they pushed the swollen front door open, the smell was cold and damp, and the specific staleness of a space that had been holding its breath for 20 years, waiting. But the structure was sound. The fireplace drew. The generator Rome's contact had managed to access through an old utility hookup coughed to life on the 3rd attempt. By nightfall, they had heat, running water, and lights in 4 rooms. It wasn't safe. Nothing was safe anymore. But it was hidden. Deeply, specifically hidden, in a way that had nothing to do with Rome Moretti and everything to do with a 22-year-old woman named Elena Vasquez who'd bought 4 acres in the Catskills under her own name and never told anyone who mattered. That night, for the first time since the wedding, all 5 of them sat in the same room and ate a real meal. Canned food heated on a camping stove. Black coffee. The fire going in the stone fireplace because the generator handled lights but not warmth. Nobody talked much. The exhaustion was total. The bone-deep, cellular-level depletion of people who'd been running on adrenaline for too long. Reyes fell asleep in his chair before he finished eating. Carver cleared the plates without being asked and took a watch position by the front window. Dominique sat across from Serafina. She'd been quieter than usual since Montana. Not withdrawn, just processing. The kind of silence you needed when the world had stopped making sense and you were waiting for it to start again. "You doing okay?" she asked Serafina. "No." Serafina looked at the fire. "But I've been not okay for a long time. This is a different flavor of it." Dominique made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Different flavor. That's one way to put it. How long have you worked for him?" 7 years? "Did you know? About Nico? About any of it?" Dominique was quiet for a moment. "I knew something was wrong 3 months ago. Patterns that didn't line up." Information reaching the wrong places faster than it should have. I told Rome. She paused. He told me I was being paranoid. He trusted Nico more than he trusted his own instincts. He trusted him more than he trusted you, you mean? Dominique looked at her, not offended, just measuring. Yes. That must have felt like something. Like a lot of things. She set down her coffee cup. But Rome doesn't make many mistakes. When he does, they're the kind that come from caring too much about something specific. That's rare in this business. It's also dangerous. She paused. Watching out for the places where he's blind? That's my job. Has been for 7 years. And me? Serafina asked. What am I? Where do I fit in the thing you're watching out for? Dominique thought about it with the seriousness the question deserved. Honestly, I don't know yet. But I've worked for Rome through a lot of difficult situations, and I've never seen him make the choices he's made in the last 2 weeks. She picked up her coffee again. Draw your own conclusions. Rome was in the back bedroom. His mother's room, she suspected, from the way he'd stood in the doorway for a long moment before going in. Working, probably. Always working. The satellite phone Carver had brought from the follow car was the only communication device they had left that hadn't been compromised, and Rome had been using it in careful, short bursts, checking assets, moving money out of accounts he suspected were being monitored, trying to rebuild some architecture of control from the ruins of everything Nico had compromised. Serafina took the legal pads from her bag and spread them on the table by the firelight. She'd been adding to them continuously. Memory working like a muscle she'd been training without knowing it, pulling details forward that she'd thought she'd buried. Account numbers from 6 years ago. Routing codes she'd seen once on a document she wasn't supposed to see. The name of a port official in Baltimore who'd signed off on shipments without asking questions. The name of a federal judge. One name that, alone, would be enough to blow the case open if it ever reached the right desk. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Rome come in until he was standing across the table from her. She didn't flinch. She noted that, privately. 2 weeks ago, she would have been across the room before her conscious mind caught up with her body. Now she just looked up. He looked at the legal pads. Then at her. How much is there? Enough to end Conrad's career, his freedom, and the freedom of 17 other people I can name. She paused. And enough to expose the Petrov Syndicate's entire domestic operation. Names, routes, buyers, 3 years of financial transfers. Rome sat down across from her. He picked up one of the pads, careful, like it might shatter, and read for a moment. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders dropped a fraction. The first real exhale she'd seen from him in days. This is, he said, and stopped. A nuclear bomb, she said. Yes, that's what I've been carrying for 6 years. If we can get this to the right prosecutor, we need to survive long enough to do that. I know. And we need someone we trust. A chain of custody that can't be broken. If Conrad knows we're trying to file, he'll move to discredit everything before it reaches anyone with the authority to act on it. Rome set the pad down, folded his hands on the table, looked at her with that direct, undeflected attention that she was still learning to receive without the instinct to look away. I have one contact, federal level. We've had a back-channel arrangement for 4 years. He's been building a case against the Petrov Syndicate from the inside. If I can reach him without tipping off Conrad's people, one contact, one chance. Yes. What's his name? His name won't mean anything to you. Tell me anyway. Why? Because if you go down before we reach him, I need to know who to run to. She kept her eyes level. And because I'm done making plans that only other people know all the pieces of. I told you that on day 1. Rome looked at her for a long moment, then, Agent Daniel Reese, retired FBI, currently with an independent oversight task force. He operates out of Philadelphia. She committed it to memory the way she'd been committing everything to memory since she was 17 and learned that the most dangerous place to keep important information was anywhere Conrad could reach it. Philadelphia, she repeated. And you trust him. I trust that our interests align. In this business, that's as close to trust as you get. That's a depressing answer. It's an honest one. She gathered the legal pads and organized them into 3 groups: financial records, names and dates, trafficking routes, and slid the 3rd group across the table to Rome. Give him these first. The trafficking documentation. That's the part that can't be explained away, can't be reframed as political opposition or mafia retribution. Those are children and women with names and dates and the financial transactions that moved them. Nobody buries that without burying themselves. Rome looked at the pages. His jaw was working again. That rhythmic tension of a man processing something through his body because his mind had run out of shelf space for it. Then his satellite phone rang. The sound in that quiet house was like a gunshot. Everyone in the room moved. Carver away from the window, Dominique's hand to her hip, Reyes jolting awake in his chair. Rome picked up. "This is a private line," he said. "You want to tell me how you got this number?" A pause. His face changed. Not the slow recalibration she'd seen before. This was instant, a full system shock that moved through him like a current and locked everything rigid. Color drained from his face in a visible wave, starting at the jaw and moving upward, and for 3 full seconds he was absolutely, terrifyingly still. Serafina watched him, and her stomach fell through the floor. "Say that again," he said. His voice was barely audible. Another pause, longer. Then Rome said, "If you touch her," and stopped. The person on the other end had said something that cut him off clean, something that cost him the sentence. He lowered the phone, looked at Dominique. "Lucia," he said. One word, like a door slamming. Dominique's expression closed down completely. "No. They have her, since this morning." "That's not possible. Lucia's been in Florence for 6 months. Conrad's people have a long reach and 6 months to plan this." Rome set the phone on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing not to destroy it. "She's alive. Conrad wants an exchange. Lucia for Serafina. 24 hours. The room went very quiet. Serafina looked from Rome to Dominique and back. "Who is Lucia?" Neither of them answered immediately. The silence was its own answer. The specific heaviness of a name that meant something too large to summarize. "His sister," Dominique said finally. Rome's hands were flat on the table. The split knuckles had reopened slightly. A thin line of red across his right hand where the skin had cracked again from pressure. He was staring at the satellite phone like it had just told him the floor didn't exist. "Half-sister," he said. "She's 20 years old. She paints. She has nothing to do with any of this." "She does now," Serafina said. The words were quiet, and they landed like stones in still water. She watched the ripples move through the room. "This is Conrad. This is exactly what he does. He finds the thing you love most, and he puts his hands on it. He used me to get to you. Now he's using her to get me back." Rome looked at her. His eyes were dark and flat, and the control behind them was costing him more than she'd ever seen anything cost him. "If I give you back to him," he said. And the sentence wasn't a question, but it wasn't complete either. It trailed off into a silence that was worse than anything he might have said. "If you give me back to him," Serafina finished for him, "he gets everything I know, he silences it permanently, and Lucia lives. For a while. Until she becomes inconvenient." She paused. "And if you don't, she suffers for it. And you spend whatever time you have left knowing you chose me over her." The firelight moved across Rome's face. He looked older than he had that morning, much older, the way people look when the universe has suddenly shown them the full dimensions of the trap they're in. "There's a third option," Dominique said. "What third option?" Rome said, too quickly, too desperately, the desperation cracking through for just a second before he hammered it back down. "We find where they're holding Lucia before the 24 hours is up, and we take her back." Dominique's voice was steady and precise and absolutely without sentiment. "We go on offense. We stop reacting." "With what? 5 people, 2 vehicles, and a satellite phone?" "With whatever it takes." Dominique looked at Serafina. "And with whatever's on those legal pads." Serafina pulled the pages back toward herself. "The trafficking documentation, the names, the judges, the senators, the financiers, the entire architecture of Conrad Vale's corruption, assembled over 6 years by the stepdaughter he'd beaten and used and traded. She'd spent 6 years thinking of this information as a shield, a way to keep herself alive. Leverage she could hold but never use because using it meant Conrad would know where she was and what she had. But she wasn't behind Conrad's walls anymore. She wasn't that 17-year-old girl being handed documents to file while her stepfather watched to make sure she was memorizing the shape of her own cage. She was in a house in the Catskills with a gun in her bag and a man who'd burned down his own empire to keep her safe, and a 20-year-old girl who painted pictures in Florence being held somewhere by the kind of men she'd spent her whole life surviving. The shield was useless. Conrad had already shown he was willing to escalate past any defensive posture they could hold. Every hour they spent hiding was an hour Lucia spent in the hands of people Conrad paid not to have a conscience. The only way out was through. Serafina organized the legal pads one more time. All three groups. Every account number, every name, every date, every transaction she'd ever memorized. She arranged them in order of impact. What would hit hardest first? What would create enough chaos in Conrad's network that his people would be too busy protecting themselves to protect him? Then she looked up at Rome. I need that contact's number. Reese. Right now. We're not ready. We're never going to be ready. Conrad has your sister, and he has a 24-hour clock running, and the only way to change the terms of this exchange is to make him too desperate and too exposed to hold any kind of leverage at all. She pressed her hand flat against the pages on the table. We don't run. We don't hide. We take the documents to Reese, we go public with everything, and we burn Conrad's operation to the ground before he can use Lucia against you. If we tip our hand before we have Lucia safe, if we wait for a perfect moment, we'll wait until she's dead. Serafina's voice was steady in a way that surprised her. Not the steadiness of someone who wasn't afraid. The steadiness of someone who'd made a decision on the other side of fear and found ground there. I know what Conrad does to people he's using as leverage. I spent 9 years being one of them. She paused. He needs Lucia alive to control you. The second he has me back, he doesn't need her anymore. Rome looked at her for a long time. The firelight. The silence. The legal pads on the table between them like a loaded weapon waiting for someone to pick it up. His hand moved across the table. Not toward her. Toward the satellite phone. He picked it up and pulled up a contact. No name, just a string of numbers. And held it out to her. You make the call, he said. It has to be you. Reese won't talk to me. Not about this. Not about Conrad. His eyes met hers. But he'll talk to you. You're the witness. You're the evidence. You're the only person in this equation he can't afford to ignore. Serafina looked at the phone. Looked at the number. Thought about the girl in Florence, 20 years old, painting pictures, having nothing to do with any of this until she did. Thought about the necklace on the white pillowcase. About the belt. About Conrad's voice saying this is your fault in her own young mind bent into agreeing with him. She took the phone. One more thing, Rome said quietly. He reached into his jacket and set something on the table beside the legal pads. Small, rectangular, a thumb drive. My financial records, everything, every account, every transaction, every contract with every organization I've ever worked with. His voice was level, and it cost him something she couldn't name. Including the ones that put me in a federal cell for 30 years, if the wrong person sees them. She looked at the drive, then at him. Why? Because you were right, from the beginning. He kept his eyes on hers. You can't trust someone who only gives you half the truth, so there it is. All of it. Take it to Reese with the rest. A pause. Whatever he decides to do with it. The fire cracked. Wind moved through the old timber walls. Outside, the Catskill Mountains sat in their ancient, indifferent darkness, and somewhere 60 miles south in the direction of the city, a 20-year-old girl who painted pictures in Florence was being held in a room by men who didn't know her name and didn't need to. Serafina picked up the thumb drive and pressed it into her palm, felt the small, hard weight of it, thought about shields and weapons, and the difference between surviving and fighting and which one she'd been doing. She dialed at 11:47 p.m. The satellite phone rang 4 times. 5. 6. Serafina stood at the window of the Catskills house, with her back to the room and her forehead almost touching the cold glass, and watched her own breath fog and clear, against the dark outside. On the 8th ring, someone picked up. Silence first. The particular silence of a man who'd answered a number he didn't recognize and was waiting to see what came through before he committed to anything. Agent Reese, Serafina said. Not a question, a pause. Who is this? My name is Serafina Vale. My stepfather is Senator Conrad Vale. I have 6 years of documented evidence connecting him to trafficking operations, money laundering through the Petrov Syndicate, and the bribery of 3 federal judges whose names I can give you right now. She paused, breathed. I also have the complete financial records of Rome Moretti's organization, voluntarily surrendered, and I have approximately 22 hours before Conrad kills a 20-year-old girl to force a trade that makes all of this disappear. The silence on the other end stretched for 10 full seconds. She counted them. "Where are you?" Reese said. "Not close enough to you. Far enough from Conrad that we've still got a window." She looked at her own reflection in the black glass. Pale face, dark eyes, the waterproof bag over her shoulder with every page of the last 6 years inside it. "I need 2 things. A secure location to transfer documents, and whatever resources you can put toward finding a girl named Lucia Moretti who's being held somewhere in the New York metro area as of this morning." Another pause. Shorter. "How do I know this isn't a play?" "You don't. But if it were a play, I'd have led with something smaller. What I'm offering you destroys a senator, dismantles an organized crime network with federal reach, and exposes judicial corruption that's been active for 11 years. She kept her voice flat. Clinical. The voice she'd developed for Conrad's paperwork. Emotion stripped out, information delivered clean. Nobody fabricates something this large for a play. The liability is too high. Reese's breathing had changed. She could hear him thinking. 22 hours, he said. 22. Maybe less. I need 4 hours to position people. You have 3. A beat. Then, give me a location radius. Rome had appeared at her shoulder, silent. He pointed at a spot on the road atlas spread open on the windowsill, a town 40 minutes south of the Catskills property. She read the name to Reese. 3 hours, Reese said again, confirming, committing. 3 hours, she said, and ended the call. She turned to face the room. Rome, Dominique, Carver, Reyes, now fully awake and standing by the fireplace with his hand on his weapon, like he'd been standing watch all along and just hadn't told anyone. He's moving, she said. Rome nodded. His eyes were doing that calculation thing, variables cycling, scenarios running, but underneath it, visible only because she'd spent 2 weeks learning the geography of his face, was something that looked like relief. The specific relief of a man who'd been carrying something alone for a very long time and had just been handed permission to put it down. We move in 90 minutes, Dominique said. Gives us time to prep and still reach the meeting point ahead of Reese's people. And Lucia, Rome said, Reese is running the search. He has resources we don't. Dominique's voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to Rome with the particular intensity of a woman who'd watched this man function for 7 years and knew exactly where his structural weaknesses were. Rome, you can't go after her yourself. Not tonight. Not before the documents are transferred. She's my... I know who she is. Dominique stepped closer. Not threatening, anchoring, the way you grab someone's arm on a moving train. If you go dark tonight and Conrad's people find you before Reese has those files, everything we have dies with you. Lucia dies anyway. Serafina dies. Everyone on those pages dies quietly, and Conrad goes on television next Tuesday and gives a speech about infrastructure spending. She paused. You hold together until the files are in Reese's hands. Then you go find your sister, in that order. Rome's jaw was a granite shelf. He looked at the floor, at his hands, at the fire. In that order, Dominique said again, quieter this time. Not a command, a plea, wrapped in the calm exterior of a woman who didn't do please. Rome looked up, met Serafina's eyes across the room. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She'd lived 9 years under a man who weaponized the people you loved, who understood intuitively that the fastest way to control someone was to put your hands on the thing they couldn't afford to lose. She knew exactly what Rome was feeling because she'd felt the version of it that came from being the person held. The helplessness, the fury, the way your body wanted to move in 6 directions simultaneously and your mind kept screaming that none of them were right. She crossed the room, stopped 2 feet from him, reached into the waterproof bag and pulled out the thumb drive and held it between them. After, she said. We do this first, then we go get her. Together. He looked at the drive in her hand, looked at her face. The firelight caught the old scars on her wrists and the newer bandaging on her palm and all the weeks of damage and survival written on her like a ledger. He took the drive. 90 minutes, he said. They moved out at 1:24 a.m. The drive south was different from every other drive she'd been part of since the wedding. No manic urgency, no fleeing, no darkness used as cover for panic. Deliberate. Planned. Dominique drove at exactly the speed limit on roads that were empty and straight and lit by pale winter moonlight that made the frozen landscape look like it had been sketched in silver. Rome was in the passenger seat. He hadn't spoken since they left the Catskills property. The satellite phone was in his lap, and every 20 minutes he checked a number he was clearly monitoring. Lucia's location, Serafina assumed, or the absence of one, the silence of a number that wasn't sending anything. Serafina sat in the back with the waterproof bag across her knees and the Glock in her right hand, not pointed at anything, just held. The weight of it was grounding. She'd noticed that about guns since Rome had given her one. The physical reality of a weapon in your hand had a clarifying effect on the mind. It didn't make you braver. It just made abstract threats concrete. And concrete threats were easier to think about than formless fear. Carver and Reyes were ahead in the second vehicle, a truck they'd found in the property's outbuilding and fueled from a cache of jerry cans Rome's contact had left. The truck would reach the meeting point first, establish, verify. The town Reese had agreed to was small and asleep. 2 traffic lights, a diner that closed at 9, a hardware store, a bar with 3 cars in the lot. Carver had texted the all clear at 2:08 a.m. Nothing unusual. No vehicles sitting surveillance style. No unfamiliar faces. Reese was waiting in the parking lot behind the diner. Alone, at least visibly. Serafina had no doubt there were people in the buildings and shadows on the street that she couldn't see. That was fine. That was expected. She'd have worried more if he'd come alone in any real sense. I was smaller than she'd imagined from his voice. 50s, compact build, the kind of face that had been forgettable on purpose for so long that it had become genuinely so. He was wearing a coat that looked like every other coat in the county, and he was standing beside an unremarkable sedan with his hands visible, which was either professional courtesy or a message. Serafina got out of the car before Rome did. Reese looked at her. She looked at him. No warm-up. "Let's go inside," he said. "No, we do it here." She pulled the waterproof bag from her shoulder and held it. "I'm not going into a building I don't know with people I can't see until I understand the full shape of what we're walking into." Reese studied her for a moment, nodded once. "Fair enough?" She unzipped the bag and handed him the first bundle of legal pads, the financial records. He took them, thumbed through 3 pages, stopped, looked up. "These are primary documents? Transcribed from memory. Every figure, every account number, every transaction date. I've been memorizing Conrad's financial operations since I was 17 because I understood that was the only insurance policy he couldn't confiscate." She paused. "I can recite any entry on any page if you want to test the accuracy. Date, amount, routing, destination." Reese looked at her with an expression she recognized from a long time ago, from before Conrad, from a teacher in middle school who'd first realized she was smarter than her circumstances suggested. The look of someone revising their assessment upward. "The secondary documents," she said, handing him the second bundle. "Names, judiciary. Conrad's connections to active federal judges, 3 names. I have the dates of the relevant transactions and the case outcomes that followed each payment." Reese's face went carefully blank. The professional blankness of a man who'd just been handed something that made his pulse jump and had learned to keep his pulse invisible. "And the third," she said, handing him the last bundle and watching his hands carefully to make sure they didn't shake, "is the trafficking documentation. Routes, participants, financial transfers. This is the part that was never meant to exist in any form. Conrad burned the originals after I processed them. He didn't know I kept copies in my head." Reese looked at the third bundle for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at Rome. Rome was standing 3 feet to Serafina's left, hands in his coat pockets, watching Reese with the level, measuring gaze of a man who'd spent his life in rooms where trust was currency and every person was potentially a debt collector. "Moretti," Reese said. "Reese, you're giving me your financials. Through her, yes. You understand what that means for you?" "I understand what it means for my sister if Conrad isn't stopped in the next 20 hours. Rome's voice was flat and even and had nothing dramatic in it, just the simple arithmetic of a man who'd done the calculation and found one answer. "Take it apart. I'm not asking for anything in return except that you find Lucia before the clock runs out." Reese looked between them. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, but a recalibration. The adjustment of a man who'd expected a negotiation and found a surrender instead. An unconditional one. "I have 3 people running the search as of 90 minutes ago," he said. "Credit card traces, cell tower data, property records tied to known Petrov affiliates in the metro area. We'll have something before morning. You'll have something now, Rome said, and his phone buzzed simultaneously as if the universe had timed it. He looked at the screen. His face changed, the flash of something raw that he locked down in less than a second, but that Serafina caught because she was watching for exactly that. Location ping, Lower Manhattan, a warehouse on the west side, registered to a shipping company that dissolved 8 months ago. Reese looked at his own phone. My people just flagged the same address. He looked up. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Rome said. You can't. I'm not asking permission. Moretti. Reese's voice was sharp now. If you go in there with muscle and it turns ugly, Conrad's lawyers will have the evidentiary chain contaminated before I can even file. Everything she just handed me becomes inadmissible. Everything. The silence was thick and pressurized. Serafina looked at Rome. He was looking at the address on his phone with the expression of a man who'd already made his decision and was just waiting for the conversation to finish. Then send your people in first, she said to Reese. Official entry. Documented. Warrant backed. If you can get one in time. Exigent circumstances if you can't. You go in clean and you get Lucia out clean. She paused. And then we walk into that gala. Both men looked at her. She reached back into the bag and pulled out a single folded document, something she hadn't shown either of them yet. A printed invitation, retrieved from her own email on a borrowed device 3 days ago. Heavy cream paper, gold embossed lettering, Conrad Vale's campaign fundraising gala. The Manhattan Grand Ballroom. Tomorrow night. He'll be there, she said, in front of 200 cameras and 400 guests. And I'm going to walk through the front door. She looked at Reese. And you're going to make sure that when I do, what I say next reaches every feet in that room without being cut. Reese stared at the invitation, stared at her. You want to go public, in the middle of a live campaign event. I want to be somewhere he can't touch me without destroying himself in the process. Somewhere with enough cameras and witnesses that if he tries to silence me, it becomes the story instead of a footnote. She met Reese's eyes. You get me a live feed, I'll do the rest. This isn't how we do things. With respect, Agent Reese, the way you do things has been letting Conrad Vale hurt people for 11 years. Her voice didn't rise, didn't need to. So we're going to do things my way. Nobody spoke. Then Reese folded the gala invitation twice and put it in his coat pocket. I need until morning to coordinate the warehouse, the warrant, the feed access. He paused. And I need your word, both of you, that nobody goes near that warehouse before my people do. Whatever they find, however long it takes, you hold. Rome looked at Serafina. She looked back. We hold, she said. It was the longest night of her life, and she'd had a lot of competition for that title. They returned to a motel 30 minutes from the meeting point. Not the Catskills, not anywhere with an operational history. A roadside place off a state highway with a hand-painted vacancy sign, and a night clerk who took cash without asking questions. Dominique took one room, Carver and Reyes split the second, and Rome and Serafina ended up in the third, not by design, but by the simple mathematics of available rooms and unavailable choices. She didn't comment on it, neither did he. They'd stopped navigating that kind of territory by the third day in Montana and replaced it with something more functional and harder to name. Rome sat on the floor with his back against the bed and the satellite phone in his hand, watching the screen. She sat in the chair by the window and watched the parking lot because old habits, and because her body had forgotten how to be in a room without monitoring the exits. At 4:17 a.m. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His whole body changed, the held breath releasing, the rigid shoulders dropping 2 centimeters, the jaw unlocking for the first time in hours. They have her, he said. Serafina exhaled. She's okay? Scared, not hurt. He paused, swallowed. Not hurt. The relief in those 2 words was immense and private, and she looked away from it to give him a second with it that wasn't being observed. She heard him drag in a slow breath and let it out. Heard the small, controlled sound of a man putting himself back together after having come very close to falling apart. Good, she said. To the window, to the parking lot, to the pale pre-dawn gray that was just beginning to suggest itself above the eastern tree line. Serafina. She turned. I was looking at her from the floor, tired and wrecked and sitting in the particular way of a man whose body had finally admitted it, had limits, and his eyes were carrying everything the last 2 weeks had deposited in them. Every mile, every betrayal, every recalculation, every locked door and unlocked one. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "The files, Reese, the gala." A pause. "You had enough to protect yourself. You could have made a separate deal without putting yourself in front of Conrad in a ballroom." "I know." "Then why?" She thought about the honest answer versus the safe one, decided she was too tired for the safe one, because surviving stopped being enough somewhere in the last 2 weeks. She said, "I've been surviving since I was 14. I know how to survive. I'm extremely good at it." She looked at her hands, the bandaged one, the scarred one. "But surviving is just being alive. It's not the same as living. And somewhere between Montana and here, I started thinking about what living might actually look like." She paused. "Conrad's been hurting people for 11 years. Not just me. People who don't have what I have, who don't know what I know, who don't have any leverage at all. And I have been sitting on the only thing that can stop it, because I was afraid." She looked up. "I'm still afraid. But afraid isn't the same as stopped." Rome was quiet for a long time. "When this is over," he said, "don't." "I'm not making a promise. I know what you're doing." She kept her voice steady. "And I'm not ready for whatever that sentence was going to be. So just hold it until after." He nodded. "Let it go." The unfinished sentence hung in the room like something that would still be there when they came back to it. She didn't sleep. He eventually did. Slumped sideways against the side of the bed, phone still in his hand, falling under in the way people do when their body simply stops asking permission. She watched the parking lot turn gray and then pale gold as morning arrived without ceremony, and thought about the gala invitation in Reese's pocket and the black velvet dress she had absolutely no way of obtaining by tonight. Then she thought about the fact that she'd walked down a cathedral aisle in a $60,000 dress to be sold to a mafia boss, and barely flinched, and decided that the dress was the least of her problems. At 8:30 a.m., Dominique knocked. "Reese has the warrant. Warehouse is secure. Lucia's in transport to a federal holding facility for medical eval." She paused. "And he says the gala access is confirmed. Press feed runs live from 7 p.m. "The senator?" Serafina asked. "Confirmed attending. He's giving the keynote at 8:30. Rome was awake, standing behind Serafina's shoulder. She felt him there before she heard him, that particular gravity of his presence that she'd stopped fighting somewhere around the second week. "Then we have 11 hours, he said. "We have a dress problem," Serafina said. Dominique looked at her, looked at Rome, back at Serafina. "I'll handle it." She turned away, paused. "And Serafina." She didn't turn back around. "What you said to Reese last night about the way things should be done." A beat. "I've been waiting 7 years for someone in that room to say it." She left. The door clicked closed. Rome looked at Serafina sideways. "I have a dress problem," she said again, like it was the most important logistical issue of the day. "You just handed a federal agent enough material to dismantle 2 criminal organizations and a sitting senator's career," Rome said. "I think we can source a dress." For the first time in as long as she could remember, Serafina almost smiled. Almost. By 6 p.m., they were in Manhattan. Dominique had produced, through means Serafina chose not to investigate, a black velvet gown that fit like it had been made for her. Not a coincidence, maybe. Dominique had spent 7 years being thorough. The city was freezing and loud and overwhelming after weeks of mountain silence. Serafina sat in the back of a car moving through midtown traffic and let the noise of it press against her, and tried to breathe through the enormity of what was 45 minutes away. Rome was beside her, also in black, also quiet. Carver was driving. Reyes wasn't with them. He was with Reese's people, part of a separate movement, a different vector of the same operation converging on the same point. "There'll be security," Rome said. "Conrad's private people, plus venue security, plus whatever federal presence Reese has managed to integrate without tipping Conrad's inside contacts. The senator will be backstage from 7:30, on stage at 8:30. You have maybe 90 seconds of uncontested time at the podium before anyone physically stops you. 90 seconds is enough. The evidence? Reese has the documents. What I'm doing tonight is different." She looked at him. "I'm not just presenting evidence. I'm standing in front of the cameras that Conrad has spent 11 years using to make himself look like a good man, and I'm telling the truth. Not filed evidence, not documents, not legal language." She paused. My voice. My face. My body in a room where he can see me and 200 cameras can see him seeing me. She felt her hands tighten in her lap. He's never faced me. Not once in 9 years. He's always had me where he could control the context. Tonight, the context is mine. Wo ish motoram cheat. Rome looked at her for a long time. The city lights moved across his face, red and white and yellow, the ceaseless pulse of a city that didn't stop for anything. If it goes wrong in there, he said quietly. I know. I know what Conrad will do. She cut him off. Not harshly, but firmly. That's why you're coming in behind me. He nodded. The grand ballroom rose ahead of them through the windshield, blazing with light, and crawling with the beautiful, important-looking people who attended events like this, and never looked too closely at the man behind the smile, because looking closely was uncomfortable, and discomfort was for other kinds of people. Serafina looked in the building and thought about a cathedral aisle in the rain 26 days ago, and a dress that had felt like a funeral shroud, and a girl who'd walked down it because she'd been told to, and because she hadn't yet understood that the only person who got to decide what happened to her body and her life was the person living inside it. She was 23 years old. She'd been surviving since she was 14. She was finished surviving. She was finished. Ready? Rome asked. She opened the car door. The cold Manhattan air hit her face like a blade, sharp and real, and very much present. And the cameras at the entrance were already turning toward the woman in the black velvet dress who was walking up the steps alone like she owned the ground beneath them. Inside the ballroom, through 200 people and a wall of chandeliers and a sea of champagne and money and performance, Conrad Vale stood at a cocktail table with 3 senators and a glass of the good stuff and a smile that had been performing for so long it had calcified into something that only looked like warmth. He didn't see her come in. He would. Serafina moved through the crowd, and the crowd parted the way. Crowds do for people who move like they have somewhere to be and nothing to lose. And at the back of the room, through the service entrance, Rome Moretti was 40 seconds behind her with Dominique on his left, and a weapon he'd checked 3 times in the car on his right. And Reese had 4 people in the room already positioned, and the live feed was running, and the clock on the wall behind the stage read 8:22, and Conrad's keynote was in 8 minutes, and she reached the stage stairs. A security guard stepped into her path. Young, professional, not cruel, just doing his job, which was keeping unauthorized people off the stage. He put one hand up, palm out. Ma'am, this area is restricted. I'm Serafina Vale, she said, calm, clear, loud enough for the nearest 12 people to hear. Conrad Vale's stepdaughter, and in approximately 7 minutes I'm going to walk onto that stage. You can step aside now, or you can still be standing there when the cameras turn. The guard blinked, looked at her face, looked at the stage, looked back at her face. Something in her expression, the absolute bone-deep steadiness of a woman who had decided, made him step aside. Serafina climbed the stairs. From the wings of the stage she could see the ballroom entire. The glittering chandeliers, the pressed suits, the careful smiles, the whole elaborate performance of power, maintaining itself through aesthetics and confidence and the collective agreement of everyone in the room not to ask the questions that would unravel it. And at the far side of the room, turning from his cocktail table with a fresh glass in hand, and a senator laughing at something he'd said, Conrad Vale looked up and saw her. The glass didn't fall. He was too controlled for that. But the smile died. Not slowly, not gracefully, but instantly, like a light switch. And in the quarter second before he rebuilt his expression, she saw it. The real face. The one behind the philanthropy and the press releases and the campaign posters. The one she'd been living with for 9 years in the locked rooms and the carefully worded chart entries and the bruises that nobody looked at directly. He saw her see it. His jaw tightened. His hand moved slightly, reaching for a phone, she guessed, or signaling someone. And 3 things happened simultaneously. A man in a tuxedo near the bar touched his earpiece. Reese's people in the corners of the room shifted their weight, and Rome Moretti came through the service entrance with the particular bearing of a man who'd decided that tonight the rules belonged to whoever was willing to enforce them. Conrad's face did something she'd never seen it do. It registered fear. The podium was 10 feet in front of her. The microphone was live. She could see the small red light that meant the audio was feeding to the house system and, through Reese's rigged connection, to every camera in the room. The clock on the wall read 8:28. 2 minutes until Conrad's people would be expecting him at the podium. 2 minutes before the evening's careful choreography demanded the stage. Serafina walked to the podium. Her heels on the stage floor made a sound that the microphone picked up and sent through the ballroom speakers. 1 step, 2, 3. People near the stage were already turning. A murmur was building from the back of the room, where Conrad was now moving toward the aisle, with 2 of his private security flanking him and the carefully reconstructed smile back on his face, but not reaching anything above his mouth. She reached the microphone, looked out at 400 faces in a room full of crystal and candlelight, and the kind of money that it had always assumed it would never have to explain itself, took a breath, and began. The microphone was cold against her fingers. She hadn't planned an opening line. She'd thought about it in the car, in the motel room, in the dark hours before dawn when sleep wouldn't come, and the ceiling of a roadside motel was the only thing between her and the full weight of what she was about to do. She'd composed sentences in her head and discarded them. Too formal, too rehearsed, too much like the polished language Conrad used to turn ugly things into palatable ones. So she said nothing for 3 full seconds. Just stood at the podium in a black velvet dress and looked out at 400 people who were still deciding whether this was part of the program. Then she said, "My name is Serafina Vale. Conrad Vale has been beating me since I was 14 years old." The room didn't erupt. It did the thing rooms do when something lands too heavy and too real. It went completely, totally silent. The kind of silence that happens when the social contract tears and everyone in the vicinity feels the draft. In the back of the ballroom, Conrad had stopped moving. Both his security men had stopped with him. She could see him from the stage. The stillness of him, the way he'd gone rigid, the way predators do when the environment shifts in an unexpected direction. Not scared yet. Calculating. Running the same kind of assessment he'd always run. How much damage, how fast, which levers to pull. She didn't give him time to find the levers. He's been laundering money through shell companies tied to his campaign donors for 9 years. He's facilitated the trafficking of women and girls through a network that runs from Baltimore through 3 offshore accounts connected to the Petrov crime syndicate. He's bribed federal judges. I have 3 names. And Agent Daniel Reese of the Federal Oversight Task Force has documented evidence of all of it, in my handwriting, in his possession as of last night. A murmur now, low and spreading, like water finding cracks. I know these things because Conrad made me process his paperwork when I was 17. He called it educational. He kept me compliant through 9 years of systematic abuse, and the very reasonable assumption that nobody in any of these rooms— She let her eyes move across the crowd, deliberate, unhurried, letting it land on the senators and the donors and the media executives and the men who'd clinked glasses with Conrad Vale at 100 events exactly like this one, would ever believe a damaged girl over a decorated senator. Conrad moved. She saw it happen. The decision made in real time, the calculation completing, the conclusion reached that the only way to contain this was to physically contain her. He started toward the stage and his 2 security men moved with him, and there was a 3rd man in a tuxedo near the left side stage stairs who'd been standing very still for a very long time and was now moving too. Reese's people moved faster. 3 of them materialized from different parts of the room. Not running, not dramatic, just inserting themselves into the geometry of Conrad's path with the efficient authority of people who'd done this before. The man in the tuxedo near the stairs was flanked before he'd taken 4 steps. One of Conrad's security men stopped at the touch of a badge produced from an inside pocket. The other one didn't stop and had his arm behind his back in less time than it took the crowd to understand what was happening. Conrad kept coming. He was alone now, his security neutralized, his path narrowing toward the stage stairs. And he was still coming because Conrad Vale had spent 40 years learning that forward momentum was its own authority. That if you moved with enough certainty, people got out of your way. He reached the stairs, and Rome Moretti stepped out of the wings. The 2 men looked at each other across 6 feet of stage floor. Rome was completely still. Conrad was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the specific fury of a man watching his controlled environment dissolve around him. His face had done something interesting since the moment she'd started speaking. The senator's mask had come off in pieces, like stucco falling from a wall, and what was underneath was smaller than the mask had suggested. Meaner. More frightened. "You have no idea what you've done," Conrad said. Not to Serafina, to Rome. I know exactly what I've done, Rome said. His voice was quiet enough that it didn't reach the microphone, but she could hear it from the podium. The particular quality of a man who wasn't angry anymore, who'd moved past angry into something cooler and more permanent. And so does she. That's the point. She's my E. Finish that sentence, Rome said very softly. Please. Conrad didn't finish it. The room had reorganized itself around this confrontation. 400 people creating an instinctive radius around the stage. Phones raised, cameras running, the live feed capturing everything and sending it somewhere Conrad couldn't reach. Serafina watched him understand this, watched the calculation cycle one more time and come up empty. Then Conrad did the thing she should have anticipated and didn't. He reached inside his jacket, not for a phone, for a weapon that his security had apparently failed to surrender at the venue's entrance, because when you were a United States senator with federal connections and the right friends in the right positions, the people checking for weapons at the door were often the same people who worked for your friends. The gun was small, and it was fast, and it came out of his jacket in the practiced motion of a man who'd handled weapons enough that the movement was clean and unhesitating, and it swung toward Serafina at the podium before anyone in the room fully processed that it was real. She didn't freeze. That was the thing she'd remember afterward, in quieter moments, and turn over in her mind because it surprised her every time. She didn't freeze. The girl who'd spent 9 years going rigid with fear, who'd pressed herself into closet floors and counted seconds and learned to make herself small and invisible and silent. That girl was not who was standing at the podium in a black velvet dress. She dropped behind the podium. The shot went over her head and took out the teleprompter screen in a spray of sparkling plastic. The ballroom ignited, screaming, movement, the stampede geometry of 400 people trying to reach exits simultaneously. Chandeliers swayed. Someone hit a table and sent crystal shattering across marble. Rome was already moving. He'd crossed the distance between himself and Conrad in the time between the shot and the sound of it, and he hit Conrad's gun arm with the full force of a man who'd been waiting for permission to move since the moment he'd walked into this room. The weapon skidded across the stage. Conrad's shoulder took the impact wrong and something gave. She heard it from behind the podium, a wet cracking sound that made her stomach clench. Conrad hit the stage floor. He didn't stay there. He was up on one knee before Rome could pin him. The animal persistence of a man running on adrenaline and the absolute refusal to be seen on the ground. And his good arm was reaching for something inside his jacket again, a backup, a second weapon, because of course Conrad Vale walked into a room with 2 weapons, and she'd known that and hadn't factored it in, and Serafina came around the side of the podium. The Glock was in her hand. She didn't remember making that decision either. The safety was off. She hadn't made that decision consciously. Her body had apparently decided to handle both of those things without consulting her, which meant some part of her had known this was where tonight was going, even when her mind was still negotiating. "Stop," she said. Conrad looked up at her from one knee. His shoulder was wrong, sitting too low, the joint disrupted. His face was a ruin of what it had been at the beginning of the evening. The senator's mask completely gone now, stripped down to something that was just an old man in pain who'd built an empire on other people's silence and couldn't process the possibility that the silence had ended. His hand was still inside his jacket. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. At the gun. At her face above the gun. She watched him look at her face, and she watched him look for the girl he knew. The one who flinched, the one who counted seconds, the one who'd learned to make herself as small as possible in his presence so that the target she presented was harder to hit. He didn't find her. "Serafina," he said. Her name in his mouth had always felt like a claim, like a brand. He'd said it the way you say the name of something you own, with the casual possessiveness of a man who'd never questioned his right to ownership. Tonight it landed differently. "Move your hand," she said. "Slowly. Show me both hands." "You're not going to I've made my decision, Conrad. Make yours." His hand came out of the jacket empty. The second weapon clattered to the stage from his fingers. He'd been holding it inside the jacket the whole time, safety on, not willing to reach for it with Rome standing over him. Serafina kept the Glock leveled until Reese's people were on the stage and Conrad's wrists were being secured and the second weapon was being bagged and documented, and then she lowered her arm and stood there with the gun at her side and her heart slamming against the inside of her ribs like it was trying to get out. Rome appeared beside her. Not touching, never without permission, just present, solid, the particular gravity of him. Okay? He said. She took a long breath in through her nose, out through her mouth. No. No? I told you I'd stop saying I was fine when I wasn't fine. She looked at her own hand. The gun. The bandaging on her palm beneath the grip. I'm not okay. My hands are shaking and I can hear my own heartbeat, and I just pointed a loaded weapon at my stepfather in front of 400 cameras. She paused. But I'm standing up. That counts. Rome looked at her for a moment. Then he reached out, slowly, the way he'd been doing everything physical since the night he'd learned to move carefully around her, and took the gun from her hand, checked the safety, and put it in his coat pocket. It counts, he said. Conrad was on his feet, wrists secured behind him, flanked by two of Reese's people and one uniformed officer who'd been staged in the building from the beginning. The shoulder would need surgery. I was holding his expression together with what was clearly the last reserves of a man who'd practiced composure so long he couldn't stop performing it even now, even with the handcuffs and the cameras and the entire architecture of his life collapsing in a ballroom in front of the people who'd built it with him. He looked at Serafina one last time as they walked him past her toward the side exit. She held his gaze. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The legal pads were in Reese's possession. The trafficking documentation, the financial records, the 3 judicial names. All of it already filed, already in the chain of evidence, already moving through a process that Conrad's connections couldn't touch because the connections themselves were named in the files. He'd spent 11 years building a cage out of other people's complicity, and tonight she'd put the key on the table and walked away. He looked away first. They led him through the side exit. The door closed behind him, and the sound of the cameras and the chaos of the ballroom continued. But the center of it, the gravitational core around which all of tonight's energy had been organized, was gone, and what was left was the specific, particular silence that follows an ending. Not peace, not resolution. The silence of something that was over. Reese appeared at Serafina's elbow. You're going to need to give a formal statement. Tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest. He paused. And there will be a lot of questions about the methodology of how this information was obtained, how it was preserved, the chain of... I know. She turned to look at him. And I'll answer all of it, every question, as many times as it takes. A pause. But not tonight. Reese studied her face. Whatever he found there made him nod once. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll send an address. He moved away into the dispersing crowd, already on his phone, already managing the next 8 variables of an operation that was going to be the biggest thing on every news feed by morning. Dominique materialized from somewhere to Serafina's left. Her expression was the same as it always was. Measured, professional, the face of a woman who'd processed extraordinary things and declined to perform a reaction, but her eyes had something in them that hadn't been there before. Lucia is medically cleared, she said. She's asking for Rome. Rome closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them. Where is she? Federal facility in Midtown. Reese's people have her. Dominique paused. She's okay, Rome. Scared, but okay. He nodded. The motion was small and tight, and contained a great deal that he wasn't going to say in a ballroom. They left through a service exit. Rome, Serafina, Dominique, because the front entrance was a forest of cameras and shouted questions, and the beginning of a news cycle that would run for weeks, and none of them had anything left for that tonight. The city outside was cold and loud and indifferent and completely unchanged by everything that had just happened inside the grand ballroom, which was exactly right. The city didn't care. The streets kept moving. Cabs and buses and the endless churn of a place that had seen everything and filed none of it under remarkable. Serafina stood on the sidewalk and breathed the cold air and felt the sweat cooling on her skin beneath the velvet dress and listened to the city do what the city did. Rome stood beside her. Come with me, he said, to see Lucia. You don't have to. It's not... I'm just asking. She looked at him sideways. Why? He thought about it honestly. Because she's going to ask who you are, and I don't know how to explain you yet, and I think I'd rather she meet you than hear me try. It was such a genuine, unguarded thing to say that Serafina almost lost her composure for the first time all evening. Okay, she said. The federal facility was a nondescript building in Midtown that looked like an insurance office and functioned as a temporary holding location for witnesses and protected persons. Lucia Moretti was in a room on the fourth floor, small, clean, institutional, in the way all such rooms were institutional, softened slightly by a wool blanket someone had found for her, and the cup of tea on the table that had gone cold while she sat curled in the corner of the couch and stared at the door. She was 20 years old, dark hair, Rome's jaw, but softer. Eyes that had been crying recently and were done with it now. The particular clarity that comes after tears, when the face has nothing left to hide behind. She looked at Rome when he came through the door, and something happened between them that was entirely private, and Serafina looked at the window and gave them the moment, listening to the sounds of it, the inhale, the brief compression of two people who'd been afraid they were running out of time to hold on to each other. Then Lucia said, in a voice still rough from crying, "You look terrible." "You look worse," Rome said. "I was kidnapped." "I know." "You could lead with, 'I'm sorry. I'm sorry.'" A pause. Then Lucia's voice quieter. "Is it over?" "It's over." "The man he's in custody. It's over, Lucia." She exhaled. The sound of it was enormous, the whole compressed weight of a day spent in a room, not knowing if anyone was coming. Then she looked past Rome's shoulder at Serafina by the window. Serafina turned from the window and met the young woman's gaze. Lucia had Rome's directness, the unself-conscious assessment of someone who'd learned to read rooms because rooms in her brother's world were worth reading. "You're her," Lucia said. "The senator's stepdaughter." "Yes. Rome told me about you earlier, on the phone before—" She stopped. "He said you were the bravest person he'd met in years, and that it was inconvenient." Serafina looked at Rome. He was studying the ceiling with the expression of a man who would not be confirming or denying anything. "He said inconvenient," she said. "His word," Lucia said. "I thought it was a love declaration. He's not great at those." "Lucia," Rome said, "I'm just noting, you were kidnapped today. Please rest." Lucia made a sound that was almost a laugh, thin and tired and real, and pulled the wool blanket tighter around herself, and in the relative safety of that institutional room with her brother standing between her and the door, she let her eyes close. Serafina and Rome stood in the hallway outside afterward, not speaking for a moment. "Inconvenient," she said. "I'm not discussing what I said to my sister during a crisis." "That seems like a very reasonable thing to want to avoid." "It is." She looked at the closed door, thought about Lucia on the couch with the cold tea and the wool blanket, 20 years old, caught in something she hadn't built and hadn't chosen, sustained by the particular resilience of people who'd grown up adjacent to danger and learned to absorb it without being defined by it. "She's going to be okay," Serafina said. "I know." Rome leaned against the hallway wall. The tiredness had finally won. She could see it in every line of his body, the way he was using the wall, the way people use walls when they're not sure their legs will do the job alone. "Are you?" "You keep asking me that." "You keep not fully answering." She thought about what an honest answer looked like. It was a complicated shape. Not clean, not simple, not the kind of resolution that wrapped itself up in 4 words. There was a federal statement tomorrow morning and months of legal proceedings after that, and Conrad's trial and all the names on the legal pads being walked through a system that was slow and imperfect and sometimes failed people who deserved better. There was her own body, still carrying 9 years of damage in the places where damage settled. The sleep, the flinching, the way her hands still sometimes moved toward exits without being asked. There was Rome Moretti leaning against a hallway wall in a federal building looking like a man who'd burned down his own empire and wasn't sure yet what that meant for whoever he was supposed to be next. "I'm okay enough," she said, "for tonight. And tomorrow?" "Ask me tomorrow." He nodded, looked at the floor, then at her, sideways. The way he'd been looking at her since the first night, like she was a problem he wanted to solve that kept turning out to be something more than a problem. "I need to start over," he said. "Whatever comes after the statements and the trial and Reese's task force finishing with what you gave them. When that's done, there's nothing left of the organization I built. I already know the pieces are too compromised. Nico took too much." He paused. "I don't know what that means yet. For any of it." She understood that any of it contained a large and specific unnamed thing that they were both declining to name in a federal hallway at midnight. "Neither do I," she said. Honest, plain, no hedging. "But I think that's okay, not knowing what comes next." She paused. I spent 9 years being very certain about what was coming next, and it was always terrible. I think I'd like to try uncertainty for a while. The corner of Rome's mouth moved. The ghost smile. The one that had been dead a long time and kept showing up anyway, like something that hadn't gotten the message. That's the most optimistic thing you've ever said, he said. Don't make it weird. I'm not making it weird. You're making a face. This is my normal face. Your normal face does not look like that. He straightened from the wall, looked at her directly. The humor faded, and what replaced it was the thing that had been building since the wedding night, since the candlelit master suite and the bruises and the 8 words she'd said that had stopped him cold and started whatever this was. Not love in the simple sense, something harder earned. The specific connection between 2 people who'd seen each other at their worst and lowest and most broken and had stayed in the room anyway. The villa in Italy, he said. Lucia mentioned it once. There's a property on the coast. Old, nothing criminal attached to it. It's the one thing I own that was never part of the organization. A pause. I thought I'd take her there. After the trial, when it's done. He paused again. There's space. She looked at him for a long moment. The invitation was clear and quietly made and asked nothing immediately except that she hear it. How far from the city? She said finally. Far enough. From everything. From most things. She nodded slowly, didn't say yes, didn't say no. Held it the way you hold something you're not sure of the weight of yet, and want to carry carefully until you know. Ask me again, she said, after tomorrow, after the statement and whatever Reese needs and all the machinery of it. She met his eyes. When I've slept. When I know what my own name sounds like on a day that doesn't feel like a war. He nodded. No pressure. No performance. Just the simple acknowledgement of a man who'd learned, not early enough, but finally, that some things can't be rushed into arriving before they're ready. I'll get you a car, he said. Tonight, somewhere safe to sleep that has nothing to do with any of this. Dominique's hotel, she said. She already offered. Of course she did. She's better at most things than you. Objectively, yes. She started down the hallway. 4 steps. Then she stopped. Turned around. Rome. He looked at her. She stood there for a moment, and the hallway was very quiet and very ordinary, and smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and the particular staleness of a building that housed difficult things. And she tried to find words for what she wanted to say, and found that the words were inadequate to the thing, which was often how it was with the things that actually mattered. The first night, she said, at the estate, when you backed up across the room and put 6 feet between us and sat in the corner. She paused. Nobody had ever done that before. Made themselves smaller so I could be bigger. She paused again. It mattered. Rome was quiet for a moment. The ghost smile came back, and this time it didn't vanish immediately. It stayed, tentative and real and slightly battered around the edges, which was the only kind of real smile that meant anything. Get some sleep, he said. She turned and walked to the elevator and did not look back, which meant she didn't see the way he watched her go, with the particular expression of a man who'd spent his life breaking things and had just discovered, late and at great cost, that he wanted to try building something instead. 6 months passed. The way months pass after catastrophic events. Not cleanly, not in a straight line, but in fragments and surges and long flat stretches where nothing seemed to be moving until suddenly everything was. Conrad Vale was indicted on 37 counts. The trial date was set. 3 of the judicial names Serafina had given Reese resulted in resignations before the indictments were even filed. The speed of their departures suggesting they'd known this was coming and had been watching the horizon for it. The Petrov Syndicate's domestic operation fractured in 4 places simultaneously as names from her documentation surfaced in federal warrants, the organization dissolving the way. Organizations do when the financial architecture beneath them is suddenly visible to people with authority to act on what they see. It was not clean. It was not fast. It was a grinding, bureaucratic, imperfect process that sometimes moved backward and sometimes disappointed and sometimes required Serafina to sit in rooms with lawyers for 6 consecutive hours, describing things she'd spent years trying not to think about, while someone across the table took careful notes and asked her to be more specific. She was more specific, every time, as many times as it took. She slept better, not perfectly. The 3 a.m. waking persisted for months, and the nightmares came back when she was tired, or when testimony had pulled her back through the specific rooms of Conrad's house, in a way that made them feel present instead of past. But she slept, and woke, and got up. And the gap between the nightmare and the waking grew slowly, incrementally, into something she could cross. She saw a therapist, a woman recommended by Reese who specialized in exactly this category of survival. It was hard and unglamorous, and on several occasions she left the sessions feeling worse than when she'd entered them, which the therapist assured her was part of the process. She trusted the therapist because she didn't soften anything, and Serafina had spent too long surrounded by people whose gentleness was a strategy. Dominique called every week. Not about Rome. Dominique wasn't a messenger. She called because somewhere in a Montana safe house in the middle of a blizzard, they'd become the kind of people who checked on each other, and Dominique honored that with the same efficient consistency she brought to everything else. Lucia wrote letters. Actual paper letters, in handwriting that had the looping extravagance of someone who'd spent years training to be an artist. She was back in Florence, back at her studio. She sent photographs of what she was working on, large abstract pieces in deep blues and golds that looked like something trying to surface from deep water. On the back of one photograph she'd written, "Rome says you're thinking about the coast. I have a room with a good view if you change your mind. No pressure, just options." Serafina kept the photograph on the windowsill of the apartment she'd rented in Philadelphia. Neutral territory, close to Reese's operation. Temporary in the way that appropriate things were temporary when you were still deciding what permanent meant. She spoke to Rome twice in the 6 months. Once about the trial, practical, logistical, the kind of call that had a clear purpose. Once about nothing in particular, on a Tuesday evening in March, when she'd had a bad day and found herself dialing his number without entirely deciding to, and they talked for an hour about things that had nothing to do with Conrad or the Petrov Syndicate or ballrooms or Montana, and she'd ended the call and sat in her apartment and thought about the conversation for a long time afterward. On a morning in late May, with the windows open and the Philadelphia streets doing their ordinary thing below, and the trial 3 weeks from conclusion, she packed a bag. Not the emergency bag, not the waterproof grab and run that she'd been reflexively maintaining for months out of a habit she hadn't been ready to break. A real bag. The kind you pack when you're going somewhere with the intention of staying. She left the white noise machine on the windowsill. She didn't need it anymore. The coast of Italy arrived in the afternoon, the kind of afternoon that seemed to have been specifically lit to make the water look like something out of a painting Lucia might make. The villa sat on a cliff above the Ligurian Sea. Old stone, terracotta roof, bougainvillea growing wild across the southern wall in impossible quantities of deep purple. The kind of place that had been absorbing time for 2 centuries and had decided somewhere along the way that it was going to be beautiful about it. Rome was on the terrace when she arrived. Not waiting, exactly. Not posed in the deliberate way of a man who'd been watching for a car. More like he'd happened to be on the terrace, and she'd happened to arrive, which was, she suspected, the version of events he'd constructed to avoid the admission that he'd been listening for tires on the gravel path. He looked better than the last time she'd seen him. Not different. Still the same scar tissue and permanent gravity and jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd overcommitted to the concept of angles. But the marrow-deep exhaustion of a man carrying a collapsing empire had eased. He looked like a person instead of a general. She walked up to the terrace, set her bag down, looked at the water. "How far down?" she asked. 60 feet, maybe 70. "And the water's clear enough to see the bottom." He paused. "In summer." "It's almost summer." "Almost," he agreed. They stood there looking at the Ligurian Sea in the almost summer afternoon, and the water was very blue and very far below, and the bougainvillea moved in a wind that smelled like salt. And somewhere inside the villa, Lucia was playing music that drifted out through an open window, something instrumental and unhurried. Serafina looked at her wrists. The scarring had changed, months of healing, the silver lines fading into something quieter, less insistent. They were still there. They would always be there. She'd stopped being surprised by that and started being something else about it, something she didn't have a clean word for yet. Not peace, not pride. Something between them. "The trial closes in 3 weeks," she said. "I know. After that, I don't have anywhere I need to be." "Okay? That's an unusual feeling, I imagine. I haven't decided what I'm doing with it yet." She paused, the not needing to be anywhere. "That's fine," he said. "Take your time." She looked at him. He was still watching the water, giving her the same thing he'd given her from the beginning, which was space. The consistent, undemanding space of a man who'd learned that the only way to earn the presence of someone who'd been trapped was never to close the exit. She reached across the distance between them and touched the back of his hand with 2 fingers. Just that. 2 fingers, lightly, on the back of a scarred hand that had been built for damage and had spent the last 6 months trying to figure out what it was built for instead. He turned his hand over, slowly. Not grabbing, not claiming, just turning it over so her fingers rested against his palm. And that was all, and it was enough. The sea moved below them in long, slow rolls that had been moving that way since before either of them existed and would continue long after, indifferent and enormous and very beautiful in the late afternoon gold. And the music from inside the villa continued, and Serafina stood on a cliff in Italy with the scars on her wrists fading in the sunlight and thought about the word living, not surviving, not enduring, not counting seconds until the next thing passed. Just living, the plain, unglamorous, everyday fact of it. Breathing in, breathing out. Choosing to stay in the room. She thought it might be something she could get used to. The sun continued its slow fall toward the water, and the light went gold, and then amber, and then the particular red-orange of a sky that had nothing left to prove. She didn't move. Neither did he. And the evening came in the way evenings do, gently, without announcement, simply arriving and settling over everything like a coat placed on the shoulders of someone who'd been cold for a very long time.